Hello everyone, I'm the DreamTeller and I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. It was late. The kind of late where the highway gets empty and it feels like you're the only person left on Earth. Rain pounded the windshield, my wipers barely keeping up, scraping back and forth at full speed. I was heading back from a long day in Carsonville, just wanting to get home, get dry, and crash. No music, just the steady thump of rain and the hum of my old Ford's engine. Then I saw him. A guy was standing by the side of the road next to a beat-up sedan, hazard lights flashing. He had one arm up, waving at me, the other gripping his jacket tight against the rain. Something about him caught my attention. Maybe it was the way he was drenched, or maybe it was the fact that I hadn't seen a single soul for the last 30 miles. I knew I shouldn't. Picking up strangers at night? Bad idea. I mean, it's the kind of story you hear about in the news and think, who in their right mind would do that? But then, the guy looked desperate, and I guess a part of me thought, if I was stuck in the middle of nowhere, I'd want someone to help too. Against all better judgment, I slowed down and pulled over, the tires crunching on the wet gravel shoulder. I rolled down the window just enough to talk. "You need a ride?" He bent down, water dripping off the brim of his cap. He looked rough. Not dangerous rough, just tired rough. "Yeah, car broke down. Won't start. I'd really appreciate it, man." He had this voice that seemed strained, like he'd been shouting, or maybe just exhausted. I hesitated, looking him over again, but before I could overthink it, I unlocked the door. "Get in." He opened the door, and a blast of cold air and rain entered the truck as he climbed in, bringing that wet dog smell with him. He slammed the door, shivering, and looked over at me with a nod. "Thanks, really, I owe you one." I shrugged. "No problem." I got the truck moving again, the headlights cutting through the darkness and rain. We drove in silence for a while. He was rubbing his hands together, trying to get warm. I could see he was soaked to the bone, his jeans dark with water, his sneakers squishing a little when he moved his feet. I was just about to ask him where he was headed when he spoke first. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice a bit scratchy. "Back home, Brighton, about 50 miles down this road," I said, glancing over at him. He nodded, staring straight ahead. "That works. Just drop me anywhere close." He paused, then added, "Not a lot of folks would stop for a guy like me." I forced a small laugh. "Yeah, well, guess I'm just that kind of guy." He turned his head to look at me. I could feel his eyes on me, and it made my skin crawl just a little. "That kind of guy, huh? You do this a lot, pick up strangers?" I shook my head. "Nah, not really. Just didn't want to leave anyone out here in the rain." He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly kind of smile. More like he knew something I didn't. "Yeah, a lot of crazy people out there," he said, his voice low. "You never know who you might pick up." I swallowed, my hands tightening a bit on the steering wheel. Something about the way he said it, the way his eyes stayed on me for just a beat too long, made my gut twist. I forced myself to focus on the road, ignoring the uneasy feeling crawling up my spine. "So, where were you headed before your car broke down?" I asked, trying to change the subject. "Nowhere special," he said. "Just driving." I frowned. "Driving? In the middle of nowhere?" He shrugged, his wet jacket making a soft rustling noise. "Sometimes you just gotta drive, you know? Get away from things." I nodded slowly, even though I didn't really understand. His answers were vague, and it put me on edge. I tried to focus on the road, but it was hard with him sitting there, his eyes darting around, taking in everything inside the truck. After a few minutes of silence, he spoke again. "You ever hear about the disappearances around here?" I felt my stomach drop a little. "Disappearances?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He nodded. "Yeah, people go missing sometimes, especially at night. Drivers mostly. They find their cars abandoned, but the people, gone. He said it like it was just another fact, like talking about the weather. I forced a chuckle, though it came out weak. Sounds like an urban legend. He didn't laugh. Instead, he turned to me, his eyes catching the faint glow from the dashboard. Maybe. But legends start somewhere, right? Maybe someone picked up the wrong person. A chill ran down my spine. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The rain kept pounding, and the windshield wipers seemed too slow, almost like they were struggling to keep up. I didn't say anything, just kept my eyes on the road, hoping he'd drop it. "What would you do?" he said, his voice cutting through the silence again. "If you picked up someone dangerous?" I felt my heart rate spike. I kept my eyes ahead, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I don't know, probably kick them out of the truck." He laughed, and it wasn't a friendly sound. It was sharp, almost mocking. "Yeah? Just like that, huh? What if they didn't want to leave?" I didn't answer. My mind was racing, trying to figure out if this guy was messing with me or if there was something else going on here. Every instinct I had was telling me I should have kept driving when I saw him standing there, but it was too late for that now. He shifted in his seat, and I could hear the wet squish of his clothes. "You got any family?" he asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. "What? Family? You got anyone waiting for you back home?" My mouth felt dry. "Yeah. Why?" He shrugged, his eyes still on me. "Just wondering. Must be nice having someone waiting for you." I didn't like where this was going. "Look, man, I'm just giving you a ride. No need to make it weird." He smiled again, that same strange smile, and turned to look out the window. "Yeah, you're right. No need to make it weird." The rest of the drive was quiet, but not in a good way. It was the kind of silence that made my skin crawl, made every little sound feel too loud. The rain, the wipers, his breathing. I kept glancing at the clock, counting the miles left until I could drop this guy off and be done with it. Finally, I saw the lights of a small gas station up ahead. Relief washed over me. "I'll drop you here," I said, my voice tight. He looked over at the gas station, then back at me. For a moment, I thought he was going to argue, but then he nodded slowly. "Yeah, that works." I pulled into the lot, the tires crunching on the wet gravel. I put the truck in park and looked over at him, waiting for him to get out. He didn't move right away. Instead, he looked at me, his eyes dark, unreadable. "Thanks for the ride," he said, his voice low. "You're a good guy. Not many like you left." I forced a smile. "Yeah, sure. Take care." He opened the door, the rain immediately soaking him again as he stepped out. He leaned back in for a moment, his eyes locking onto mine. "Watch yourself out here," he said. "You never know who you might run into." And then he shut the door, disappearing into the rain without another word. I watched him walk towards the gas station, my heart pounding, my hands still gripping the wheel tight. Something about the way he moved, the way he looked back at me just before going inside, made my stomach twist. I didn't waste any time. As soon as he was out, I shifted into drive and pulled back onto the road, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. He was gone, swallowed up by the rain and darkness. I drove faster than I should have, my mind racing. The guy hadn't done anything, not really, but something about him had gotten under my skin, made me feel like I'd just dodged a bullet. The rain started to let up after a while, and the road seemed less endless. The lights of Brighton came into view, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I was almost home, almost safe. I pulled into my driveway, the familiar sight of my small house finally making my shoulders relax. I killed the engine, sitting there for a moment, letting the silence wash over me. The rain had stopped completely, and everything felt still, almost peaceful. But then I noticed something. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, that uneasy feeling creeping back in. There, on the passenger seat, was a wet spot. It wasn't just damp from the guy's clothes, it was a puddle, like he'd been leaking water the entire time. And next to it, barely visible in the dim light from the street lamp, was a small, dark object. I reached over, my hand trembling, and picked it up. It was a key. Not a car key or a house key. It was old, rusted, with strange markings carved into the metal. I turned it over in my hand, my heart pounding again. Suddenly, the quiet of the night didn't feel so peaceful anymore. I got out of the truck, locking it behind me, my eyes scanning the shadows around my yard. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I hurried inside, locking the door, double-checking it before I finally let myself relax. I tossed the key onto the kitchen counter, staring at it for a moment before turning away. I just needed sleep. Everything would make more sense in the morning. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, that strange smile, the way he'd asked about my family. I kept thinking about the key, the puddle, the way he'd looked back at me just before disappearing into the gas station. It felt like there was something I was missing, some piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. Around 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep. I got out of bed, heading to the kitchen to get a glass of water. The house was dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside, casting long shadows across the walls. I stopped when I saw the counter. The key was gone. I stared at the spot where I'd left it, my heart pounding in my ears. I turned on the lights, my eyes scanning the counter, the floor, everywhere. It was just gone. My hands started to shake, that feeling of unease growing stronger, turning into full-blown fear. I checked the doors, the windows, every lock in the house. Everything was secure, but it didn't make me feel any better. I could feel it, that sense that I wasn't alone, that someone or something was watching me. I grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed the number for the local police. I didn't even know what I was going to say, that I picked up a weird guy and now I was spooked. But before it could connect, I heard something. A creak from the living room. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It was quiet, just the sound of the house settling, I tried to tell myself. But then it came again, louder this time. Slow, deliberate, like someone was trying not to be heard. My heart was pounding, my mouth dry. I took a step back, my eyes locked on the dark hallway that led to the living room. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. Someone was there. Suddenly the lights flickered, then went out, plunging the house into darkness. I let out a shaky breath, my hands fumbling for the flashlight app on my phone. I turned it on, the beam cutting through the darkness, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. I stepped forward, each creak of the floorboards echoing in the silence. The living room was empty, but the front door was open, just a crack. My heart dropped. I knew I'd locked it. I was sure of it. I took a step closer, my hand reaching out to push it closed when I heard it. A whisper. Low, barely audible, coming from just outside the door. I couldn't make out the words, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. I stepped back, my hand shaking as I grabbed the door and slammed it shut, locking it again, double-checking it. The whisper stopped, and for a moment everything was silent. Then from behind me I heard it, a soft, raspy voice. You never know who you might run into. I spun around, the flashlight beam darting across the room, but there was no one there. My breath came in short, panicked gasps, my heart hammering in my chest. I backed away, my eyes darting around, trying to find the source of the voice, but there was nothing. Just shadows, just silence. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen, every light in the house on, my eyes fixed on the front door, waiting for something, anything to happen. But nothing did. The night passed slowly, each minute feeling like an hour, until finally the first light of dawn started to creep through the windows. I never saw the guy again. Never heard about any abandoned car or any strange figures on the side of the road. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the world outside is dark, I swear I can still hear it. That soft whisper coming from the shadows, reminding me of that night. You never know who you might run into. It was a late Tuesday night in Vancouver. I had just wrapped up a double shift, my eyes dry, muscles aching, and my brain operating on fumes. I trudged into the building, barely noticing the broken light flickering above the entrance. All I could think of was my bed, warm, soft, and waiting. The lobby was empty. The hum of the fluorescent lights echoed faintly, mixed with the distant sound of traffic outside. I pressed the button for the elevator, rubbed my temples, and leaned against the wall as I waited. The elevator arrived with a dull chime. I stepped inside, tapping the button for the 5th floor. My eyes were nearly shut when the doors began to close. Just as they met, the power flickered. The lights above dimmed, blinked, and then came back on, but not as bright as before. I sighed, leaning my head back against the cold metal wall. A tired breath escaped me. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. There was someone else in the elevator in the corner where the light barely reached. I hadn't noticed them when I got in, which made my stomach tighten. I could hear them breathing, slow and steady, almost as if they were trying to blend into the shadows. I shifted my weight, trying not to let my nerves show, my eyes squinting to make out the figure. A tall shape, standing perfectly still, maybe facing me. It was hard to tell. I cleared my throat, a reflex more than anything else. "Hey," I muttered, trying to sound casual, though my voice cracked a bit. No response. The elevator started moving, the slight jolt making my stomach drop, but not as much as the silence from the stranger. I glanced at the control panel, hoping for something to distract me, the numbers lighting up one by one, but my eyes kept flicking back to the figure in the corner. Who gets in an elevator and stands in the corner without saying anything? My fingers tapped against my thigh. I looked again, trying to see more. They were wearing something dark, maybe a hoodie. Their face was hidden, either looking down or covered by the shadow. I swallowed, feeling my pulse quicken. The breathing was too controlled, too deliberate, almost as if they were trying to be unnoticed. The elevator shuddered as it passed the 3rd floor, and suddenly the lights flickered again. This time they didn't come back fully. They dimmed to a weak yellow, casting long shadows along the walls. My heart started pounding in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears. I could feel the sweat on my palms as I clenched my hands into fists, trying to keep calm. I wasn't about to let paranoia get the better of me. Maybe it was just some neighbor. A weird one, sure, but just a neighbor. The elevator slowed, approaching the 4th floor. I kept my eyes on the door, willing it to open. There was something wrong about the whole thing. The way the person stood there, their silence, the heavy air in the small space. I could feel my throat tightening, my breaths getting shorter. When the door finally opened on the 4th floor, I almost stepped out just to get away. But it was dark, and I had no business on that floor. I stayed put, watching as the doors slowly closed again, the soft hum of the motor filling the silence. The moment the doors shut, I felt it. Movement. Not mine, theirs. A shuffle, the sound of fabric brushing against metal. My eyes darted to the corner, and I swear they had moved an inch closer. My mouth went dry. I tried to speak again, but my voice caught in my throat. I forced a cough, the sound too loud, bouncing off the metal walls. "You all right, man?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Nothing. Just the breathing, still slow, still deliberate. 5th floor. The light above the door lit up, and I almost collapsed with relief. The doors creaked open, but before I could step out, the power flickered once more and the elevator jerked to a stop. The lights went out completely, plunging us into darkness. My heart skipped a beat, then started hammering faster. I couldn't see anything, not even my own hands in front of my face. But I could hear it, that breathing. Closer now. Too close. I took a step back, pressing myself against the wall, my mind racing. I reached out, my hands fumbling for the control panel. I found the door open button and pressed it, but nothing happened. I jabbed it again, harder this time. Still nothing. The breathing was right in front of me now, almost in my ear. I could feel the warmth of it, steady, unhurried, as if whoever it was had all the time in the world. My chest tightened and I could barely get enough air. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Who the hell are you?" My hands moved frantically over the buttons, pressing them all, anything to make the elevator move, to get the lights back on. The elevator didn't budge. The breathing stopped. The silence was worse. So much worse. My ears strained, trying to pick up any sound, anything at all. I couldn't hear them anymore. Were they still there? Had they moved? My mind was screaming at me to do something, but I didn't know what. Suddenly I heard it. A whisper, so soft I almost missed it. "Don't move." The voice was low, almost a growl, coming from right in front of me. My body froze, every muscle locking in place. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, just stand there, my back against the wall, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I wanted to run, to push past them and get out, but I couldn't see. I didn't know where they were, didn't know if they had a weapon. The seconds dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. I could feel the sweat trickling down my back, my fingers trembling as they rested against the cold metal of the wall. The whisper came again, closer this time. "Don't move." My knees felt weak, my legs ready to give out. I swallowed, my throat dry, trying to keep it together. I needed a plan, anything. My phone. I had my phone in my pocket. Slowly, trying not to make a sound, I moved my hand, inching it towards my pocket. The moment I shifted, there was movement in front of me. Fast, sudden. A hand grabbed my wrist, squeezing it hard. I gasped, the pain shooting up my arm. "I said don't move," the voice hissed, the breath hot against my face. I could smell them now, a mix of sweat and something else, something metallic. My mind went blank with fear. I was trapped, stuck in the dark with this person, and I had no idea what they wanted. I stopped moving, my hand freezing just inches from my pocket. Okay, I muttered, my voice barely a whisper. Just tell me what you want." The grip on my wrist tightened for a moment, then let go. I pulled my hand back, cradling it against my chest, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The breathing started again, still close, but moving away slightly. I could hear them shifting, the sound of their shoes scuffing against the floor. Then a click, a small metallic sound, followed by a dim light, a flashlight. They had a flashlight. The beam was weak, barely enough to see by, but it was something. The light moved, pointing at the control panel. I could see their hand now, long fingers, dirty nails, pressing one of the buttons, the emergency stop button. My eyes widened as I realized what they had done. They had stopped the elevator on purpose. We were stuck because of them. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice shaking. The light moved, shining directly in my face, blinding me. I squinted, turning my head away. "Shut up," the voice said, calm, almost bored. I could hear them moving again, the light shifting, pointing down at the floor. I blinked, trying to see past the spots in my vision. I needed to see their face, needed to know who I was dealing with. But they kept the light low, only enough to keep me guessing. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out. I could try to fight them, but I didn't know if they had a weapon. I could barely see them, and they were too close. The elevator was too small, nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. My chest felt tight, my breathing shallow. I needed to stay calm, needed to think. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't have any money, all right? Just let me go and I won't say anything. I swear." The light flickered, and for a brief second I saw their face. Pale, unshaven, eyes wide and bloodshot. They were smiling, but it wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile that made my skin crawl, made my stomach turn. "Who said I want your money?" they whispered, their voice barely audible over the hum of the elevator. The smile faded, and they leaned closer, the light flickering again before going out completely. "I just need you to listen." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "Listen to what?" I asked, my voice cracking. There was a pause, the darkness pressing in on me, the air thick and suffocating. To me, they said, their voice soft, almost gentle. No one ever listens. I could feel them moving, could hear the rustle of their clothes, the faint creak of the elevator. They all think they know. They think they understand, but they don't. Not until it's too late. I had no idea what they were talking about, but I nodded anyway, my head bobbing up and down quickly. Okay, I said, my voice trembling. I'm listening. Just take it easy, all right? The silence stretched on, the only sound my own ragged breathing. I could feel my legs shaking, the exhaustion from earlier mixing with the fear, making it hard to stay on my feet. I just wanted this to be over, wanted to be out of there, away from them. Suddenly there was a loud thud, the elevator jerking slightly. My heart skipped a beat, my body tensing. The lights flickered back on, weak but steady. I blinked, my eyes adjusting to the sudden brightness. The person was still there, standing just a few feet away, their head tilted to the side, watching me. Their eyes were wide, unblinking, their lips curled into that same unsettling smile. I felt my stomach churn, my hands trembling at my sides. They reached out, pressing the emergency button again, and the elevator shuddered, the doors creaking open. My eyes darted to the opening, my heart leaping into my throat. The hallway. My hallway. I could see the faded wallpaper, the dim light at the end. Freedom. I took a step forward, but they moved, blocking my path. Their smile faded, their eyes narrowing. Remember, they said, their voice low, a hint of anger in their tone. You said you'd listen. I swallowed, my throat tight. I did, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I listened. Their eyes bored into mine, and for a moment, I thought they were going to say something else, thought they were going to stop me. But then they stepped back, their face expressionless. I didn't wait. I moved past them, stepping out of the elevator, my heart pounding in my ears. The doors started to close behind me, and I glanced back just for a second. They were still there, standing in the middle of the elevator, watching me. The smile was gone, replaced by something else, something I couldn't quite place. The doors closed, and I heard the elevator start to move again, the soft hum fading as it ascended. I stood there, staring at the closed doors, my hands trembling, my body shaking from head to toe. I didn't know what had just happened, didn't understand any of it. But I was out. I was safe. I turned, walking down the hallway, my legs feeling like they might give out at any moment. I reached my door, fumbling with the keys, my hand shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to get the key in the lock. I pushed the door open, stepping inside, the familiar smell of my apartment washing over me. I closed the door, locking it, my back pressing against the wood as I slid down to the floor, my body finally giving out. I sat there, my head resting against the door, my eyes closed. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me feeling drained, empty. I could still hear their voice in my head, still see their face. That smile. I didn't know who they were, didn't know what they wanted. But I knew one thing. I wasn't taking that elevator again. Not ever. I've always been drawn to the eerie side of urban exploration. There's something exhilarating about stepping into places frozen in time, where everything's left exactly as it was. I've explored abandoned hospitals, old schools, and once, a mansion rumored to be haunted. But nothing I'd ever experienced compared to the old textile factory I found on the outskirts of town. This was around 5 years ago, back when I was in my early 20s, and had just moved to the city. I'd heard about the factory from a friend who shared my interest in urban exploring. It was supposedly shut down in the 80s and had been left untouched ever since. I couldn't resist. The day I chose to go was overcast, and it felt like the sky was weighing down on everything. I parked my car a few streets away and approached the factory on foot, a little giddy from the thrill of doing something I probably shouldn't. The factory was a huge, hulking building with broken windows and faded brickwork. I remember thinking that it looked like it was frowning, like the building itself didn't want me there. But I shook off the feeling, telling myself it was just the atmosphere getting to me. As soon as I slipped through a broken side entrance, I felt that familiar chill. Inside, the air was stale, filled with a damp, musty smell. There was an unnatural quiet, not the kind of quiet you get in a peaceful place, but the kind that feels aware. I brushed it off, telling myself that I was just excited. The place was perfect for exploration. Dust-covered machines, forgotten tools scattered on workbenches, papers strewn about as if everyone had just walked out one day and never returned. I took my time photographing everything, making sure to capture the abandoned beauty of it all. About 20 minutes in, I found myself in a long hallway lined with old offices. Each door was slightly open, revealing glimpses of overturned desks, file cabinets, and stacks of yellowed papers. As I approached the last room, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. A perfect line of small, dusty handprints on the wall, each one at the exact same height. They looked too fresh, almost as if someone had pressed their hands there recently. My stomach knotted. I told myself they were probably just old marks, but the unease had already set in. The deeper I went into the factory, the stranger things became. I found a break room where a table was covered in small animal bones, maybe from rats or birds, that had been carefully arranged into a spiral pattern. Next to it were cigarette butts and an old, cracked lighter. The cigarettes looked fresh, maybe a day or two old at most. My skin prickled. Someone had been here recently. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was intruding on someone else's space, that I wasn't welcome. After finding those things, I felt the urge to leave, but I was also curious, almost drawn, to see more. I moved further down another darkened hallway, my footsteps echoing in the silence. Then, just ahead of me, I spotted a small pile of toys, a doll, a toy truck, and a little plastic dinosaur, sitting in the center of the hallway. They were arranged in a neat line, almost like a display. Each one was covered in a thin layer of dust, yet it looked so deliberate, like someone had set it up for me to find. I remember my hands shaking as I lifted my flashlight, scanning the area, half expecting to see someone standing there. At this point, my instincts were screaming at me to leave, but something kept pulling me further inside. I found a staircase that led down into what must have been a storage area. The air got colder and I could smell something foul, like rotting wood mixed with something metallic. I took a deep breath and descended, my flashlight barely cutting through the darkness. When I reached the bottom, I found a large, rusted metal door slightly ajar. Against my better judgment, I nudged it open. Inside was a small room, empty except for a large mirror propped up against the far wall. The mirror was cracked, with splinters running through the glass like veins. And in the center of the floor was a chair facing the mirror. It looked like someone had been sitting there watching themselves for hours. I don't know what compelled me, but I stepped closer to the mirror. That's when I saw it, a fresh handprint on the glass, small and smudged as if someone had pressed their hand there moments before I entered. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me, soft but unmistakable. I whipped around, heart pounding, but there was no one there. My flashlight beam flickered for a second, and in that brief moment, I felt a presence like someone was standing right behind me, breathing down my neck. The air felt thick, oppressive, and I knew I wasn't alone. I backed out of the room, my mind racing, every instinct screaming at me to get out of there. As I retraced my steps, I noticed new handprints on the walls, each one leading back toward the entrance. They weren't there before, I was sure of it. It felt like someone was guiding me out, almost like they wanted me to leave. I didn't stop to think. I just kept moving, my footsteps echoing louder and faster, matching the frantic beat of my heart. When I finally burst through the broken door and into the open air, I felt like I could breathe again. I didn't look back as I walked to my car, but I could feel eyes on me, watching from the shadows of that factory. I drove home in silence, trying to process what had just happened. Part of me wanted to believe it was just my mind playing tricks, but I knew what I saw. I hadn't been alone in there. And whoever, or whatever, was inside wanted me gone. To this day, I can still see those handprints in my mind, clear as ever, like an imprint burned into my memory. I haven't been back, and I don't plan on it. Some places are abandoned for a reason, and whatever's in that factory, it's best left alone. I had just finished another brutal late shift at the hospital. It was nearly 2 a.m. when I finally clocked out, body aching, eyes stinging. My brain felt fried, like it was operating on autopilot. All I wanted was to get home, fall into bed, and sleep for what felt like a month. The night shift always took a lot out of me, but tonight, the exhaustion had reached another level. I just needed to make it back to my place in Maplewood, get out of these scrubs, and pass out. The road was empty, as it always was around this time. The highway stretched out, dark and endless, with the occasional streetlight casting a weak glow on the asphalt. Just me, my beat-up old sedan, and the nothingness around. There's something about driving alone at night that usually feels peaceful, but tonight it was just eerie. I could hear my own breathing, steady but tired, as the car hummed along the deserted road. Suddenly, without warning, the engine sputtered. My heart skipped a beat. I tapped the gas pedal, but the car only responded with a choking sound like it was giving up on life. The headlights flickered, and before I could even react, the car coasted to a complete stop, dead in the middle of nowhere. The dashboard lit up with red and orange warnings. I cursed under my breath and tried the ignition again, but it clicked uselessly. Nothing. Great. Just great. I looked around, but there was nothing. No buildings, no gas stations, just a dark stretch of highway and miles of forest on either side. I grabbed my phone from the cup holder. No signal, not a single bar. I could feel a pulse of frustration mixed with an edge of fear settling in my chest. My fingers tapped the screen again and again, hoping something would change, but it was hopeless. My phone might as well have been a paperweight. I sighed, leaning back against the headrest, staring up at the ceiling of my car. It was pitch black out there, and the only sound was the wind rustling through the trees and the occasional creak of the car cooling down. I couldn't even hear a car in the distance. Nothing. And then, I saw them. Headlights. In the rearview mirror, 2 bright dots appeared, coming up slowly behind me. My heartbeat quickened, thudding in my ears. I watched as the lights drew closer, then slowed down, until they stopped just behind my car. The headlights were blinding, casting long shadows into the forest around us. I squinted, trying to make out the vehicle behind me. It looked like an old truck, one of those big, boxy ones, the kind you see hauling junk or doing farm work. The truck just sat there, idling. The engine made a low, growling noise like it was waiting for something. I stared at it in the mirror, every nerve on edge. My hands were clammy, fingers drumming nervously on the steering wheel. What were they doing? Why had they stopped? 100 scenarios ran through my head, none of them good. Maybe they were just seeing if I needed help, or maybe they weren't. After what felt like forever, the truck door opened. I turned my head, trying to get a look at the driver. A figure stepped out, a man, tall, wearing a hat. He moved slowly, like he had all the time in the world. My stomach tightened. He started walking toward my car, his boots crunching on the gravel shoulder of the road. I locked the doors without thinking, the click echoing in the silence. He stopped by my window, his face obscured by the shadow of his hat. I could barely make out his features, just the outline of a beard and the glint of his eyes in the dark. He knocked on the glass, a dull thud that made me jump. "Hey there," he called out, his voice muffled by the window. "Car trouble?" I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the window controls. My instincts were screaming at me to keep the glass up, to stay locked in. But I needed help. There was no way I was getting this car started on my own. Not out here. I cracked the window, just a couple of inches. Yeah, it just died on me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Won't start back up. He nodded slowly, like he was thinking it over. That's no good, he said. Not a good place to be stranded. No kidding, I thought. Yeah, you wouldn't happen to have a phone with a signal, would you? I asked, hoping for a miracle. He shook his head. No signal out here, it's a dead zone. But I can give you a ride if you need one. Closest town's about 15 miles back. Maplewood was closer, about 10 miles ahead, but it was still 10 miles. I eyed the man, trying to gauge if he was trustworthy. Something about him put me on edge. Maybe it was the way he was just standing there, too still, too calm. Or maybe it was just the situation. Middle of nowhere, dead car, no phone. I didn't have a lot of options. I think I'll just wait here, I said, forcing a smile. Maybe someone else will come by. The man didn't move. He just stood there staring at me through the window. The silence stretched, the air thick with tension. My heart was pounding now, hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. Suit yourself, he said finally, his voice flat. He turned and walked back to his truck, his boots crunching against the gravel. I watched him climb in, shut the door, and then nothing. The truck just sat there, still idling, headlights shining into the night. I waited, breath held, expecting him to drive off. But he didn't. He just stayed there. The seconds ticked by, turning into minutes. I glanced at my phone again, still no signal. My fingers were trembling now, and I could feel the panic starting to build. What was he doing? Why wasn't he leaving? Suddenly, the truck's engine revved, a loud roar that shattered the silence. The truck lurched forward, and for one terrifying second, I thought he was going to ram my car. I braced myself, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. But the truck swerved at the last moment, pulling up alongside me instead. I turned my head, my eyes wide. The passenger window of the truck was rolled down, and the man was staring at me. He didn't say anything, just looked at me with those dark eyes, his face still hidden in shadow. My stomach twisted, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of my neck. Last chance, he called out, his voice carrying over the rumble of the engine. You need a ride or not? I shook my head, my throat too tight to speak. Something was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. I just needed him to leave. I needed to be alone, to figure out what to do next. He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right then, he said. He rolled up the window and the truck started moving again, pulling ahead of my car. I watched as the taillights grew smaller until they disappeared around a bend in the road. The silence rushed back in, thick and suffocating. I let out a shaky breath, my hands still trembling. I had to get out of here. I couldn't just sit here waiting for whatever, or whoever, might come next. I opened the door, stepping out into the cold night air. The wind cut through my scrubs and I shivered, rubbing my arms. I looked around, trying to get my bearings. There was nothing but trees and darkness, the highway stretching out in both directions. I popped the hood, hoping maybe, just maybe, I could see something, some obvious problem I could fix. But as I stared at the mess of wires and metal, I knew it was useless. I wasn't a mechanic. I couldn't fix this. I needed to start walking. Maplewood was ahead, and if I stuck to the road, I could make it. It might take hours, but it was better than staying here. I grabbed my phone and a small flashlight from the glove box, then shut the car door, the sound echoing in the stillness. I started walking, my footsteps crunching on the gravel shoulder. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, but it felt small, like it could barely hold back the night. The wind rustled the trees, and every so often I'd hear something move in the underbrush. A small animal, probably. But every noise made me jump, my heart pounding in my ears. The minutes dragged on, each step feeling heavier than the last. The road was empty, no sign of headlights in either direction. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the truck again, those blinding headlights coming up behind me. But there was nothing, just the dark, endless highway and the distant sound of the wind. And then, I heard it. An engine, somewhere behind me. Low and distant, but getting closer. My stomach dropped and I turned, the flashlight beam shaking in my hand. Far down the road, I could see them. Headlights, growing brighter, getting closer. It was the truck. It had to be. My pulse quickened, panic surging through me. I needed to hide. I couldn't be out here in the open. I turned and ran, the flashlight bouncing wildly as I sprinted toward the trees. Branches whipped against my face as I pushed through the underbrush, the ground uneven beneath my feet. I didn't stop until I was deep in the woods, far enough that the road was just a faint strip of gray through the trees. I dropped to the ground, panting, my back pressed against the rough bark of a tree. I listened, my ears straining. The engine grew louder until it was right there, just on the other side of the trees. I could see the headlights now, cutting through the darkness, the truck crawling along the road. I held my breath, my body tense. The truck slowed, coming to a stop right where I'd left the road. The engine idled, the headlights casting long shadows through the forest. I could see the man now leaning out of the driver's side window, his head turning slowly as he scanned the area. He was looking for me. My heart hammered in my chest, my hands slick with sweat. I stayed perfectly still, not daring to move, not even to breathe. The man sat there for what felt like an eternity, just watching, the engine rumbling softly. And then finally he pulled back into the truck and the headlights swung away as he started driving again, slowly disappearing down the road. I stayed where I was, my body trembling, until I couldn't hear the engine anymore. Then I got up, my legs unsteady beneath me. I needed to keep moving, but I couldn't go back to the road, not while he was out there. I turned deeper into the woods, the flashlight barely piercing the darkness ahead. I didn't know where I was going, just away. Away from the truck, away from the road, away from the man with the dark eyes. The forest was thick, the trees pressing in on all sides. Branches snagged at my clothes, leaves rustling as I pushed through. My heart was still racing, every sound making me jump. The wind howled through the trees, and somewhere in the distance, I heard the faint roar of the truck's engine again, far away but still there, still searching. I kept moving, one step at a time, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't know how long I walked, how far I went. Hours, maybe. The night seemed endless, the darkness never lifting. My legs were aching, my body screaming for rest. But I couldn't stop. Not until I was safe. Eventually, the trees began to thin, and I stumbled out into a clearing. Ahead, I could see lights. A house, small and isolated, but there. A sliver of hope. I hurried toward it, my feet barely lifting off the ground, exhaustion pulling at me. I reached the front door and pounded on it, my fists thudding against the wood. "Hello, please, I need help," I called out, my voice hoarse. For a moment, there was nothing, just the wind and the rustling leaves. And then, I heard footsteps inside, the sound of a lock turning. The door creaked open and an older man stood there, his face lined with concern. "What happened to you?" he asked, his eyes widening as he took in my disheveled appearance. "My car broke down," I said, my voice shaking. "There was a man. He was following me. Please, can I use your phone?" The man nodded, stepping aside to let me in. "Of course. Come in. You're safe now." I stepped inside, the warmth of the house washing over me, and for the first time that night I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I was safe. For now. I was dead tired when I pulled into that motel just outside of Winston, North Carolina. It wasn't a place you'd choose unless you had no other options, which I didn't. The neon sign that read, "Motel Winston Vacancy," flickered erratically, and the whole place looked like it hadn't seen an update since the early 80s. It was late, and after driving for nearly 10 hours, my only thought was getting some sleep. I didn't care about the peeling paint or the dull, cracked tiles. I just needed a bed. I checked in, paid cash because their card machine was down for maintenance, and got a key, a real key. not one of those plastic cards. Room 6. It was right by the far end, next to the vending machines, and the fluorescent light above the door buzzed like a swarm of bees. I pushed the door open and it creaked like in some horror movie. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and mildew. The carpet was dingy and the bedspread was an uninviting shade of puke green, but at that moment, it was the best place on earth. I tossed my bag onto the bed, kicked my shoes off, and went to take a quick shower. The water pressure sucked and the temperature was all over the place. Still, I got out feeling a little better, if not fully refreshed. I dried off, pulled on some boxers and lay down, letting the TV's dull chatter become background noise. It was some infomercial about a blender, the kind of stuff you never really watch but let your brain tune out to. Somewhere around midnight, I was half asleep when I heard it. A rattle, faint but enough to make me blink my eyes open. I paused, waiting to see if it was just my imagination. But there it was again. Someone trying the door handle. The click of metal shifting against metal, testing. My heart thudded in my chest and I lay there listening, hoping it would just stop. But it didn't. The sound of slow, heavy footsteps moved past my door, and I could feel the tension rising in my shoulders. They were deliberate, not rushed, not hurried, just heavy thuds, each one echoing in the quiet, almost synchronized with my heartbeat. Whoever it was, they walked to the end of the walkway, paused, then started back toward my door. I could hear the steps getting closer, and my mind was racing. I wasn't sure if I should get up, stay quiet, or grab something to defend myself. I forced myself up, moving as silently as I could. The air was cold against my bare skin. I grabbed the chair by the small desk and propped it under the door handle, my pulse thundering in my ears. The footsteps stopped right outside. I held my breath. Whoever was out there stood still. I could hear them breathing, low and heavy. My eyes were locked on the door, watching for any sign of movement. My hand gripped the back of the chair so tightly my knuckles were white. After what felt like forever, the footsteps moved away again, slowly fading down the walkway. I stayed there, frozen for a while. 5 minutes? 10? I wasn't sure. Finally, I let out the breath I was holding. I moved the chair and peeked out the window. The parking lot was empty except for my car and a beat-up sedan that looked like it had been there a while. I couldn't see anyone. I wasn't about to just ignore this. I threw on some jeans and a t-shirt, grabbed the key and stepped out. The night air was cool, almost biting, and the walkway was dimly lit. I glanced around, but there was no one in sight. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. I headed for the front office, each step making the old wood creak beneath my feet. The guy at the front desk looked up when I came in. He was older, probably in his late 50s, with graying hair and glasses perched low on his nose. He was reading some dog-eared paperback, looking like he wanted to be anywhere but there. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Did you see anyone walking around just now? Someone was messing with my door." He blinked at me, looking confused. "What room you in?" "Room 6, I said, my patience already wearing thin. He shook his head slowly, putting down his book. "Ain't nobody out there," he said, his voice flat. "Haven't seen a soul all night." I felt a spike of irritation. Well, someone was out there, I heard them. They tried my door. Twice. The guy just stared at me, expressionless. "Look, man, I've been here all night. Nobody's been walking around. It's just you and me here, far as I know." I clenched my jaw, trying not to lose it. "Can you at least check the cameras or something?" He gave a slow shake of his head. "Cameras are busted. Been that way for a while." I took a deep breath, fighting back the urge to yell. It was pointless. This guy either didn't care or didn't want to deal with it. I turned and walked back to my room, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. The walkway felt longer on the way back, each step echoing in the empty night. I glanced over my shoulder more than once, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. Back in the room, I locked the door, double-checking it this time. The chair went back under the handle, and I sat on the bed, staring at the door. I tried to convince myself it was just some drunk or maybe even a stray animal, but the footsteps, those were real. And the breathing. I wasn't imagining that. I turned the TV back on, cranking the volume up a bit. The noise helped, even if just a little. I lay back down, but sleep wasn't coming. My eyes kept darting to the door, my ears straining for any sound. Minutes felt like hours, and every creak of the building settling made my heart jump. I was wide awake, every muscle tense, waiting for something to happen. It must have been around 2 a.m. when I heard it again. The faint rattle of the door handle, followed by the slow, heavy footsteps. My mouth went dry and I sat up, my heart pounding. I could feel my chest tightening as I listened. The steps moved past my door, fading into the distance, then coming back again, slow and deliberate. I could barely breathe. It was the same as before. The pause right outside, the heavy breathing, then the steps moving away. I got up, hands shaking, and grabbed my phone. I dialed 911, my voice barely steady as I spoke to the operator. I told them someone was trying to get into my room, that I needed the police. The operator assured me they'd send someone, and I hung up, my eyes glued to the door. The minutes dragged on, and I kept waiting, listening. The footsteps didn't come back, but I knew someone had been there. My stomach was in knots, and I could feel the sweat trickling down my back. It was probably 20 minutes before I saw the red and blue lights flash through the curtains. I moved the chair, unlocked the door, and opened it just enough to see the 2 officers approaching. I stepped out, waving them over. They asked me what happened, and I told them everything. The door handle, the footsteps, the breathing. They listened, nodding, then split up. One of them walked around the back of the building while the other stayed with me, asking more questions. I could tell he was trying to keep me calm, but I could see it in his eyes. He thought I was just another paranoid guy hearing things in a crappy motel. The other officer came back after a few minutes, shaking his head. "Nothing back there," he said. "No signs of anyone." I felt a mix of frustration and fear. "I'm not making this up," I insisted. "Someone was out here." The officer with me nodded, trying to be reassuring. "We'll do a patrol around the area, see if we spot anyone. But if you hear anything else, just give us a call, all right?" They left, and I watched as their car pulled out of the parking lot, the lights fading into the distance. I stood there for a moment, the night air chilling me to the bone, before I went back inside. I locked the door again, put the chair back, and sat on the bed, my heart still racing. It was quiet again. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you hyper-aware of every sound, every creak and groan of the old building. I tried to tell myself it was over, that whoever it was had moved on, but deep down I didn't believe it. I must have dozed off at some point, exhaustion finally winning out. When I opened my eyes, the room was dim, the first hints of dawn filtering through the curtains. For a moment, I felt a sense of relief. Maybe it had just been some weird, isolated thing. Maybe I could just get out of here and never think about this place again. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and froze. The chair I'd wedged under the door handle was moved. Not far, but it was definitely not where I'd put it. My blood ran cold. I scanned the room, my eyes darting to every corner, every shadow. Nothing looked out of place, but I could feel it. Something was wrong. I got up slowly, my legs feeling like they might give out. I checked the bathroom, the closet, even under the bed. Nothing, but that chair had moved. I knew it. My hands were trembling as I grabbed my bag, shoving my things inside. I wasn't about to stay another minute in that place. I threw on my shoes, grabbed the key, and yanked the door open. The walkway was empty, the parking lot still and silent. I didn't waste any time. I headed straight for the office, wanting to drop off the key and get the hell out of there. The guy at the front desk looked up as I came in, his expression the same bored indifference as the night before. "Checking out?" he asked, not even bothering to hide his yawn. "Yeah," I said, my voice tight. "Someone was in my room last night." He just stared at me, like he couldn't care less. "Told you, ain't nobody been here." I slammed the key down on the counter, my patience finally snapping. The chair moved. Someone was in there. He shrugged, barely even reacting. Sorry, man. Ain't much I can do about that. I didn't bother responding. I turned and walked out, my heart pounding, my mind racing. I got in my car, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot, not looking back. The whole place felt wrong, like a bad dream I couldn't shake. As I drove away, the sun was just starting to rise, casting long shadows across the empty road. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me, but there was nothing. Just the open road and the fading memory of that rundown motel. I don't know who or what was out there that night. Maybe it was just some creep messing around, or maybe it was something worse. All I know is that I'll never set foot in Winston again, and I sure as hell won't be staying in any more motels like that. It was supposed to be a simple night of fun. Sarah and I had set up the tent in the backyard. Nothing fancy, just a small 2-person tent, thick enough to block the wind but light enough that we could still feel the outside air. We live in Bend, Oregon, which isn't exactly the middle of nowhere, but our house backs up to a few empty lots and a line of trees. It's not quite wilderness, but it gets pretty dark at night. It's quiet too, no cars or traffic noises after 10. We figured we'd sleep outside for a change, see the stars, tell a few spooky stories, just get away from our phones and the hum of everyday life. No big expectations. The tent was a bit of a struggle, more complicated than we thought, but we finally got it up just before dusk. I laid out our sleeping bags and Sarah brought out some snacks and we settled in. By the time it was pitch dark, we were both in our sleeping bags, snuggled close. We talked for a while, laughed at each other's terrible ghost stories, and listened to the faint sounds of crickets in the night. It was peaceful. I was just starting to doze off when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Footsteps. At first I thought maybe it was an animal, a raccoon or a stray cat. But the steps were heavy, deliberate, crunching on the dry grass in a way that didn't match the random scurrying of wildlife. I opened my eyes, staring into the darkness of the tent, holding my breath. My heart picked up a bit, but I kept calm. Maybe one of the neighbors was out. Maybe someone was letting their dog out. I reached over and nudged Sarah, whispering, "Do you hear that?" She went quiet, her head turning towards the thin fabric of the tent wall. We both just lay there, listening. The steps came again, slow, moving in a circle around us. It wasn't just footsteps now. There was something else. Voices, hushed, just above a whisper. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but I could tell there were at least 2 different voices, both low and quiet. My breath caught in my throat. Sarah's hand found mine. She squeezed it, her fingers cold. I turned my head to her, and I could just barely make out her eyes wide open. Her face was tense. We didn't say a word. It felt like even the smallest sound would somehow draw their attention, whoever they were. The footsteps moved again, a shuffling sound circling the tent in slow, methodical steps. I could hear the grass rustling, the dirt crunching under their feet. The voices were getting closer, clearer, but still too faint to understand. I could feel my heartbeat now, thudding in my ears. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to just open the tent and shout, scare them off. But the other part of me, the more primal part, said to stay put, keep quiet, and wait. One of the voices sounded closer now. I heard it on the side of the tent near my head, just a few feet away, if that. I could hear breathing. It was labored, like the person was whispering and trying to catch their breath at the same time. I tensed up, every muscle in my body locking in place. Sarah was frozen too, her hand gripping mine so hard it hurt. Then, something touched the tent. A light press against the fabric, just above where my head was. It wasn't much, just enough that I felt the material brush against my hair. My whole body went rigid. Sarah let out a tiny gasp, barely audible, but I heard it, and I'm sure whoever was out there heard it too. Everything went still for a moment. No footsteps, no voices, just silence. Then I heard the zipper. It wasn't ours. It was somewhere outside, faint but unmistakable. The sound of a zipper being slowly pulled open. Sarah's eyes widened and I could feel her panic rising, the way her hand trembled in mine. I didn't know if it was a bag, another tent, or something else entirely, but the sound was enough to make every hair on my body stand on end. I reached slowly for my phone, moving as quietly as I could. My fingers fumbled in the darkness, finally finding the cool metal edge of it. I didn't want to turn on the screen, not yet. The light would give us away. I just held it waiting, my thumb hovering over the side button. The footsteps started again, moving around the tent, faster this time. The voices were still hushed, but they sounded more frantic, less controlled. I heard one of them say something, a word or maybe a name, but it was too quiet to understand. Sarah squeezed my hand again, harder, and I knew we had to do something. We couldn't just lay there and wait. I leaned in close to her ear, barely whispering, "On 3, we run." She nodded, her eyes glistening in the dim light from my phone. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. My heart was racing, my palms sweaty. I counted in my head, 1, 2, 3. I hit the side button on my phone, the screen lighting up bright in the darkness. At the same time, I threw myself towards the tent zipper, yanking it down as fast as I could. The cold night air rushed in, and I heard Sarah scrambling behind me. I pushed out of the tent, stumbling to my feet. The backyard was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the street lamp out front. I turned, grabbing Sarah's hand, and we ran. We bolted across the yard, the grass damp beneath our feet, the cold biting at my skin. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see who or what was behind us. I just focused on getting to the back door, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. We hit the door, and I fumbled with the handle, my hands shaking. It felt like it took forever, but finally it opened and we stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind us. We stood there in the dark kitchen, both of us breathing hard, staring at each other. My hand was still on the doorknob, my knuckles white from how hard I was gripping it. Sarah was shaking, her eyes wide, her face pale. I reached out, pulling her close, and she buried her face in my chest. We stayed like that for a long time, neither of us saying anything. Eventually, I let go of the doorknob, turning the lock slowly, trying not to make too much noise. I listened, straining to hear anything from outside. It was quiet. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. I reached for the light switch, hesitating for a moment before flipping it on. The kitchen flooded with light, and I squinted, my eyes adjusting. Sarah looked up at me, her eyes red. "What the hell was that?" she whispered. I shook my head. I didn't have an answer. I didn't know who they were or why they were out there. All I knew was that we weren't safe outside. Not anymore. We spent the rest of the night in the living room, every light in the house on. I kept my phone in my hand, ready to call the police if we heard anything else. But the rest of the night was quiet. Eventually, Sarah fell asleep on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I just sat there, staring at the back door, listening. When the sun finally came up, I felt a little bit of the tension ease. The light made everything feel a little less real, like maybe it was all just a bad dream. But when I looked out the window, I could still see the tent, standing there in the middle of the yard, the door hanging open, the sleeping bag still inside. And I knew it wasn't a dream. It was real. We didn't go back out there. Not right away. We just sat in the living room, sipping cups of coffee, neither of us saying much. Eventually, I knew I had to go check. I couldn't just leave the tent out there forever. I told Sarah to stay inside, and I grabbed the baseball bat we kept in the closet. I wasn't taking any chances. The yard was quiet as I stepped outside, the morning sun casting long shadows across the grass. I could hear birds chirping, the sound of a car passing by in the distance. Everything seemed normal. But as I got closer to the tent, I felt my stomach tighten. The door was open, just like we had left it, the fabric flapping gently in the breeze. I reached out, pulling the flap back, peering inside. The sleeping bags were there, crumpled and messy. But there was something else, something that hadn't been there before. A small, black bag, sitting in the middle of the tent. My heart skipped a beat, and I took a step back, my grip tightening on the bat. I didn't want to touch it. I didn't even want to be near it, but I couldn't just leave it there. I took a deep breath, reaching down and grabbing the edge of the bag. It was light, almost empty. I unzipped it slowly, my hands shaking. Inside, there was a single piece of paper, folded in half. I pulled it out, my eyes scanning the words written in messy, jagged handwriting. "We'll be back." I dropped the bag, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked around, my eyes scanning the line of trees at the back of the yard. There was nothing there, no sign of anyone. But I knew deep down that whoever had been out there, whoever had circled our tent in the middle of the night, they weren't done with us, and they'd be back. I turned and walked back to the house, my legs feeling like jelly. I locked the door behind me, sliding the deadbolt into place. Sarah looked up at me from the couch, her eyes full of questions. I didn't say anything. I just shook my head, dropping the bag on the floor. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. We packed up the tent that afternoon, shoving it into the garage, out of sight. We didn't talk about it, didn't make any plans to camp out again. Whatever fun we'd been hoping to have, whatever adventure we'd thought we'd find in our own backyard, it wasn't worth it. Not after what happened. The note stayed with me, though. The words burned into my mind. I kept thinking about those voices, the way they'd circled us, the way they'd whispered just outside the tent. I didn't know who they were, or why they'd picked our yard, but I knew one thing for sure. We weren't safe. Not anymore. It was a Friday night, and the sky over Millstone, Kentucky was dark as pitch. I was in the garage working on a few last-minute touches on my old Dodge Charger. The light above my workbench flickered a little, but I barely noticed. I had the hood up, grease on my hands, and country music playing quietly on the radio. I was alone, or so I thought. Then I caught a movement, just in the corner of my vision, barely within the reach of the light spilling from the open garage. It was subtle, almost like a shadow passing over something, and I looked up. My first thought was that it was probably a raccoon or maybe a deer that wandered a little too close to the house. I squinted toward the edge of the light, my eyes adjusting. That's when I saw it. Someone was standing there. The figure was just outside the light, mostly hidden by darkness, maybe 10, 15 feet away. My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't make out any features, just a person, standing silently. No movement, no sound, just standing there watching me. "Hey," I called out, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Who's there?" No response. The figure didn't budge, didn't make a sound. I felt my pulse quicken, my stomach tightening. My first instinct was to reach for something, anything, to defend myself. My eyes darted to the workbench. There was a wrench right there, within reach. I grabbed it, holding it tightly in my right hand, feeling the cool steel against my skin. I said, "Who's there?" I yelled again, louder this time. Still nothing. The silence felt heavy. My garage, which had always been a place of comfort, felt alien. My eyes stayed fixed on the figure, trying to see some detail, a face, clothing, anything. But it was like the darkness itself had a hold on them. I took a step forward, wrench raised, my heart thudding in my chest. The figure didn't move, just kept staring. Or at least I thought it was staring. It was hard to tell. "If you don't get off my property, I'm calling the cops," I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady. My mouth was dry. The air felt heavy, thick almost, and I could hear my own breathing, too fast and too loud. The figure shifted slightly then, a small, almost casual movement. My skin prickled. I could see a hand raise, slow, deliberate, and point toward me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. The whole scene felt wrong, like my body knew something I hadn't figured out yet. I backed up slowly at first, keeping my eyes on that shadow. I took another step back until I felt the edge of the workbench against my back. The wrench felt useless, but I held on to it anyway, my knuckles white. The figure stayed still, the arm still raised, pointing. I decided to make a move. My phone was on the workbench, just a foot or so away from my hand. I reached for it without looking, my eyes glued to the figure. My fingers brushed against the phone and I grabbed it, fumbling to unlock the screen. My hands were shaking and I kept my eyes on that dark shape, afraid that if I looked away for even a second it would rush at me. The light from the phone's screen lit up the garage, casting a faint glow. I glanced down quickly, just long enough to swipe to the dial pad. When I looked back up, the figure was gone. I blinked, my heart pounding in my ears. I scanned the darkness, my eyes darting from left to right, trying to catch any sign of movement. The driveway, the edge of the yard, the space between my garage and the house. Nothing. It was just gone. I could feel my whole body trembling, my breath catching in my throat. No way, I muttered to myself. I strained my ears, listening for footsteps, for anything, but all I could hear was the faint hum of the radio and the night insects outside. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Maybe it was some stupid kid playing a prank. Maybe they saw the phone and took off. That thought made sense, but it didn't make me feel any better. I stood there for a few moments longer, my eyes still scanning the yard, but it was empty. Just darkness and shadows. Slowly, I lowered the wrench, my arm aching from holding it up. I turned back to the workbench, setting the wrench down. My hands were still shaking. I took another deep breath and tried to focus. I just needed to finish up and get inside. I could still feel the tension in my muscles, that tightness in my chest that wouldn't quite go away. I glanced over my shoulder one last time, and then I went back to work. I tightened the last bolt, wiped my hands on a rag, and closed the hood of the charger. The whole time I kept one ear tuned to the darkness, waiting for the sound of footsteps or breathing or anything that might give away someone sneaking around. Nothing. Just the quiet night. Finally, I finished up. I grabbed my phone, switched off the garage light, and pulled the door down. The darkness swallowed everything, and I hurried to the house, locking the door behind me as soon as I stepped inside. I stood there in the kitchen for a minute, my heart still racing, listening to the silence of the house. I shook my head, trying to shake off the feeling. It was probably just a kid, I told myself again. Some punk messing around. But as I went through the house, turning off lights and checking the locks on the windows, I couldn't shake that feeling. That sense that someone had been there watching me, and that they might still be out there somewhere. The next day, I woke up early, the memory of the night before still fresh in my mind. I had my coffee, went out to the garage, and everything looked normal. No sign that anyone had been there. No footprints, no damage, nothing. I even walked around the yard, checking the edges of the property, but there was nothing. Just dew-covered grass and the quiet morning air. I went about my day, trying not to think about it too much. But that night, when the sun went down, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. I kept the garage door closed, worked on the car inside with the door locked. I found myself glancing at the windows, checking the yard, just waiting for some sign of movement. A few days went by and I started to relax. I told myself it really was just a kid, just a one-time thing. Nothing happened, and life went back to normal. Almost. I still kept an eye on the yard at night, but I stopped expecting to see anything. Then about a week later, I was out in the garage again. It was late, around midnight. I had the radio on low, a beer on the workbench. I was replacing a belt, focused on getting it done so I could get some sleep. I heard it again. That same sound, that faint movement just outside the light. My head snapped up, my eyes locking on the edge of the garage. My stomach dropped. There it was again, that figure standing just at the edge of the light, half hidden in the darkness. The same stillness, the same silence. My mouth went dry, and my hand tightened around the wrench I was holding. "You gotta be kidding me," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the hum of the radio. The figure didn't move, didn't say anything. It just stood there, like before, watching me. My heart started pounding again, that same fear bubbling up inside me. I took a step back, my eyes fixed on the dark shape. "What do you want?" I yelled, my voice cracking slightly. The fear was turning to anger now. Who the hell was this? Why were they here messing with me like this? No response. The figure stayed silent, still. I felt a chill run down my spine. I wasn't going to just stand there this time. I turned, grabbing my phone off the workbench, my fingers fumbling over the screen. I looked back up, expecting the figure to be gone again, but it was still there. My breath caught in my throat. I punched in 911, my thumb hovering over the call button. "I'm calling the cops," I shouted, my voice trembling. "You better get out of here." The figure shifted slightly, just a small movement, and then slowly it stepped forward, just enough that the light from the garage touched it. My blood ran cold. I could see it now. A man wearing dark clothing, his face covered by a hood. His hands were at his sides, empty, but there was something about the way he stood, the way he looked at me, that made my skin crawl. "Get out of here," I yelled again, my voice almost a squeak. He didn't move, just stared at me, his face still hidden in shadow. My thumb pressed down on the call button and I brought the phone to my ear, the dial tone ringing loudly. The man took another step forward and I felt panic rising in my chest. I backed up, almost tripping over the workbench. The operator picked up, her voice calm and professional. 911, what is your emergency?" "There's someone outside my garage," I said, my voice shaky. "They're just standing there watching me." I looked up again, but the man was gone. My eyes darted around, scanning the yard, the driveway. But there was nothing. Just darkness and the empty yard. "Sir, are you in a safe location?" the operator asked, her voice cutting through the silence. I swallowed hard, my eyes still scanning the darkness. I think so," I said. "He was just here. I don't know where he went. Can you lock yourself inside the house? Officers are on their way." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Yeah, I'm going inside." I backed away from the garage, my eyes still on the yard, and then turned and hurried into the house, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked it, double-checking the deadbolt. I stayed on the line with the operator until I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. I peeked through the window, my eyes scanning the yard, but it was empty. A police car pulled up and 2 officers got out, flashlights in hand. I hung up with the operator and went to the door, opening it just enough to call out to them. They searched the yard, the garage, even walked around the perimeter of the house, but they didn't find anything. No footprints, no sign that anyone had been there. One of the officers, a tall guy with a serious face, came back to the door. "We didn't find anything, sir," he said, his voice calm. "Are you sure you saw someone?" I nodded, my hand still shaking. "Yeah, I'm sure. He was right there, just standing there, watching me." The officer exchanged a glance with his partner, then looked back at me. "We'll keep a patrol in the area tonight. If you see anything else, don't hesitate to call us." I thanked them, and they left, their car disappearing down the road. I stood there for a moment, staring out into the darkness, my heart still pounding. I didn't sleep much that night. Every little noise made me jump, my eyes darting to the windows, expecting to see that figure again. The next morning, I decided I needed to do something. I went out and bought a set of security cameras, spending most of the day installing them around the house and garage. I put one on the garage, another on the back of the house, and a third covering the driveway. I set them up to alert my phone if they detected any movement. Days passed, and nothing happened. The cameras didn't pick up anything unusual, and I started to feel a little better. I still kept an eye on the yard at night, but the tension slowly started to fade. Maybe whoever it was had moved on. Figured I wasn't worth the trouble. But then, one night, I was sitting in the living room, the TV on low, when my phone buzzed. My heart skipped a beat. It was an alert from the cameras, movement detected by the garage. I grabbed my phone, opening the app, my hands trembling. The screen showed the garage, the light from the security camera casting a faint glow. And there, just at the edge of the light, was the figure. The same dark clothing, the same hood hiding their face. just standing there, still as a statue, watching the garage. My breath caught in my throat. I felt a surge of fear, my hands shaking as I grabbed the phone, dialing 911 again. The operator picked up, and I quickly explained what was happening, my eyes glued to the screen. The figure didn't move, just stood there watching. The minutes felt like hours as I waited for the police to arrive. I kept my eyes on the screen, afraid to look away, afraid that if I did, the figure would disappear again. The operator stayed on the line, her voice calm, but I barely heard her. My entire focus was on that screen, on that figure. Then suddenly, the figure moved. It stepped back, fading into the darkness, and then it was gone. The camera showed nothing but the empty yard, the light from the garage casting long shadows. A moment later, I heard the sirens, and I ran to the door, throwing it open as the police car pulled up. The officers searched the yard again, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, but they found nothing. No footprints, no sign that anyone had been there. One of the officers, the same tall guy from before, came back to the door, his expression serious. "We didn't find anything, sir," he said, "but we'll keep an eye out. If you see anything else, call us right away." I nodded, my heart still pounding. "Thanks," I said, my voice barely a whisper. They left, and I stood there, staring out into the darkness, my mind racing. Who was this person? Why were they here? What did they want? I didn't have any answers, and that was the worst part. The not knowing, the fear that they could come back at any time. I locked the door, double-checking all the windows, and then I sat in the living room, my eyes on the security feed. I stayed up all night watching, waiting, but the figure didn't come back. That was a week ago, and I haven't seen anything since. The cameras have been quiet, no movement, no sign of the figure. But every night I sit there, watching the feed, waiting. I don't know if they'll come back, but I can't shake the feeling that they will. And when they do, I'll be ready. My wife and I decided to start our life together in a house that seemed perfect. It was one of those old houses, with a modest garden and a porch that we had already envisioned decorating for Christmas. It was our first home as a couple, newlyweds, ready to start this new phase of life. The house had a rustic charm, a wooden structure that creaked with every breeze, but it was exactly what we were looking for. A quiet place, with distant neighbors, where we could build a home. There was nothing suspicious about the property. Even the real estate agency gave us a trustworthy impression. Deep down, we just wanted a place of our own. On the first night, as we tried to settle in, something strange began to happen. It was late, and I was practically falling asleep when I heard a noise coming from the walls of the bedroom. At first I thought it was just the old wood creaking, but the sound had a strange pattern, like something was scraping rhythmically, a sound that echoed from side to side. I tried to ignore it, assuming it was normal for old houses, but my wife noticed it too and became uneasy. She asked me if I was hearing it too, and that only made the atmosphere feel even heavier. We tried to convince ourselves it was just our imagination. The next day, while unpacking boxes, my wife found something odd near the kitchen door frame. There were writing marks on the wall, somewhat scribbled but still visible. When we looked closer, we could read them. They were short phrases like, "Don't trust the silence," and "Leave before he wakes up." They seemed like things left by someone who had lived there before, maybe a prank by teenagers, but at the same time, I felt a chill down my spine. It was a strange way to welcome us. My wife let out a nervous laugh and suggested it might be some local superstition, but I admit it lingered in my mind. As the week went by, things started getting worse. One night I woke up suddenly and noticed a chilling air in the bedroom. When I looked at the clock, it was 3:03 a.m. I got up to see what was going on and saw that the back door was wide open, swinging with the wind. I had locked the door before going to bed, I was sure of it, but there it was, open wide. My heart was racing and I felt a tension in the air that was impossible to ignore. I tried not to wake my wife and checked the whole house, but found nothing out of place. I went back to bed, trying to convince myself it was just a coincidence. But after that night, sleep became a battle. After that night, we stayed more alert, but tried not to give it too much importance. I thought maybe it was the wind that had opened the door, some draft we hadn't noticed. But 2 days later, something even stranger happened. We were having dinner in the living room when the television, which was off, turned on by itself. The screen was black for a few seconds, as if warming up, and then started to show a disturbing static. The entire room was filled with that high-pitched static noise, making us jump in fright. I went to the TV and turned it off, but as I turned away, it switched on again by itself. I turned it off once more, and this time unplugged it. That's when I noticed my wife was pale, holding her fork, unable to eat. That night we slept with the lights on. The house no longer felt as cozy as before. It was as if the atmosphere was loaded with something dark. In the middle of the night, once again, the sound of footsteps woke us up. They were slow steps coming from the hallway, as if someone was walking toward our bedroom. I held my breath, trying to listen more closely, and my wife squeezed my hand, trembling with fear. The footsteps stopped right in front of our door, and then silence took over the house. We lay still, waiting for any sound, any sign, but there was nothing. Gradually, I began to feel that the house didn't want us there, as if something was trying to push us out. The next morning, we decided to check every corner of the house, looking for any signs of who might be coming in, or what could be causing all this. We found more messages hidden around the house, as if concealed under layers of old paint. Messages like, "He watches," and "Don't provoke what lies dormant." It was as if someone had tried to leave us warnings about something they couldn't fully explain. My wife suggested calling someone to bless the house, but I was skeptical. Deep down, I wanted to believe that all of this was just some bizarre coincidence. But that night, something happened that made me reconsider everything. It was almost 3 a.m, and we were awake, too afraid to sleep. Everything was quiet, but suddenly the back door opened once again, slowly, as if someone was pushing it from outside. The cold wind entered the house, and I felt a chill that paralyzed me for a moment. This time I was determined to find out what it was, so I grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the door. My wife begged me not to go, but I felt I had to do something. When I got to the door, I looked outside and nothing. Just the empty garden and the cutting wind of the early morning. After that night, the atmosphere in the house only worsened. It was as if each room carried an invisible weight, something that stifled and made the air heavy and cold. I started noticing that my wife was becoming increasingly restless, as if the house was draining our energy. Even the days seemed dark inside. The sun entered through the windows in a strange, dull way, and the silence was always broken by faint but constant noises. One day, while my wife was taking a shower, she screamed my name. I ran to the bathroom and found her trembling, pointing to the fogged-up mirror. There was a phrase written as if someone had run their finger over the moist surface. "You don't belong here." Panic began to set in. We talked about the possibility of leaving, of giving up on the dream that was slowly turning into a nightmare. But the reality was that our budget was tight, and leaving would mean practically losing everything we had saved for our start together. So, we decided to try to face the situation, as if the house was testing us, waiting to see how long we would last. Deep down, I still thought maybe everything had a rational explanation, even if my wife had already given up on believing that. I started investigating the house's history, but I found nothing that would explain what we were going through. One night, as I tried to sleep, I heard a whisper. It was a low sound, almost imperceptible, but it woke me instantly. I lay still, trying to figure out if it was my imagination, but then I heard it again, clearer. "Leave." I felt my whole body freeze. The voice seemed to echo throughout the room, as if it came from all directions at once. My wife heard it too, and at that moment we knew it wasn't just paranoia. Every moment we spent in the house, it was as if an invisible presence surrounded us, watching us, testing our limits. The fear we felt that night was unlike anything I had ever experienced. That's when we made a decision. This would be our last night. We started packing in silence, ready to leave at dawn. But just before dawn, the scariest thing of all happened. Our bedroom door locked by itself, and we heard heavy footsteps approaching. The sound seemed to come from all sides, surrounding the room. We tried to open the door, but it was as if it was being held shut from outside. Panic set in, and while I struggled with the handle, my wife began praying, crying in fear. Only after a few minutes, and which felt like hours, did the door finally open, and the house returned to silence. When we finally left that room, we didn't exchange a word. We grabbed our things in a rush and left the house early in the morning, our hearts racing. With every step to the car, we looked back, as if expecting something to follow us. The feeling of being watched only faded as we moved further from the house. It was like we could finally breathe again. During the drive, we stayed silent, both trying to make sense of what we had just experienced. The house became a blur on the landscape, and I felt I'd only be at peace once we were far away from it. After we left, we tried to forget what happened. We found a small apartment, lacking the charm we wanted, but it was safe, and most importantly, didn't carry that oppressive feeling. However, some things we couldn't ignore. Some nights I still wake up at 3 in the morning, with the impression that the back door is opening on its own. My wife also has recurring nightmares, feeling the same chill that filled the bedroom. And every now and then, as she walks past the bathroom mirror, she swears she sees those words again, like an echo from the past. I decided to look into the house more after we left. I spoke to a neighbor in the area, and he told me that previous residents always left before completing a year. No one mentioned why, but he knew that some of them had also reported strange events. One of them, he said, left a message inside a closet, a phrase written in shaky letters. "You won't understand. Just leave." That stuck in my mind for a long time. It was as if everyone who passed through there was left with the same dark warning, a final alert for those brave enough to venture into that house. Today, when people ask me about our first house, I just say it was a tough phase, without going into much detail. But honestly, I'll never forget what we went through there. To this day, I wonder if whatever presence was there wanted to scare us or was simply warning us. Maybe we'll never know what really happened in that house, but whatever it was, I learned not to ignore the signs. Sometimes, leaving the right place at the right time is the only choice, even if the reason remains a mystery. I used to work in a big city but lived far away in one of those countryside regions where all you find are fields, silence, and some sparse streetlights. It was a somewhat solitary life, but I had gotten used to the routine. I left work late, almost always the last one out of the building, and took the deserted road back home. That night didn't seem any different, at least until I came across an accident in the middle of the road, on one of the sharpest curves of the main road. It was a truck overturned, completely blocking the way. I knew it would take hours to clear the road, so I sat there in the car trying to think of an alternative. Then I remembered a route I'd heard about once, a shortcut that went down a dirt road and cut off a good few miles. It wasn't exactly well known. Locals avoided it, especially at night. But since I was tired and didn't want to wait, I decided to take a chance. It couldn't get any worse, right? After all, it was just a stretch of dirt road that would soon reconnect to the main road. Little did I know that this decision would turn my life upside down. The beginning of the shortcut was actually fine, except for a few potholes here and there. But as I drove deeper, the trees grew taller, almost forming a tunnel, and the sense of isolation increased. The sound of gravel and stones crunching under the tires was practically the only thing I could hear, aside from the engine and the occasional song of a night bird. It was an eerie calm, the kind you feel when something is off, but I tried to ignore it. With every turn, the road seemed to narrow more, and the sparse streetlights began to disappear completely. Deep down, I think I already knew I shouldn't have entered there, but who hasn't had those gut feelings they ignore? That's when I saw by the roadside something that looked like a piece of red fabric caught on a branch. It was a scrap of cloth, like a torn band, with dirt marks and something dark I didn't want to think about. I slowed down to look closer. but as I glanced at the rearview mirror, I thought I saw a shadow moving quickly along the roadside. It was so fast it seemed like my imagination, but it gave me a chill. I gripped the steering wheel and tried not to look at the mirror again. As I drove on, I began to feel a strange pressure in my chest, as if the air was heavier there. The vegetation around me seemed to grow denser with every meter I advanced, and my car was starting to scrape along the edges of the road, brushing against branches and leaves that practically invaded the path. The darkness was almost absolute, even with the high beams on, and I could only see what was directly ahead. That made me even more nervous, as it felt like anything could jump out of the dark at any moment. A little farther ahead, I saw what looked like an abandoned building, maybe an old hunting post. The thought of stopping crossed my mind, but I quickly dismissed it. I was already uneasy and, to be honest, had a feeling of being watched. You know that unsettling feeling of being observed, even when you can't see anyone? I looked around inside the car, trying to find some calm, but it was hard. Suddenly, a sound broke the silence. It sounded like scratching, a dry noise, as if something was scraping against the side of the car. My heart raced, and I froze for a few seconds, listening as that strange noise intensified. I took a deep breath, gripped the steering wheel, and accelerated a bit, hoping it was just a branch scraping against the body of the car. But the sound didn't go away. On the contrary, it seemed to get closer, as if it was following me. The strangest part was that even with the car moving, that noise remained right by my side, at a steady pace that didn't make sense. Suddenly, something inside me snapped into survival mode, that fear that makes you want to run without looking back. But I was inside the car alone, with no way to escape. I thought about speeding up as fast as I could, but feared the car might get stuck in the mud or lose control and crash into a tree. If that happened, I'd be trapped there. In a desperate act, I turned off the radio and sat in complete silence, trying to understand what was happening. The scratching stopped for a moment, and I felt a brief but intense wave of relief. That relief didn't last long. A shadow crossed the road right in front of the car, too fast for me to identify. It was tall, with an almost human stance, but distorted. Reflexively, I hit the brakes hard, and the car skidded a bit on the dirt road. My heart felt like it was beating in my throat, and I could only stare straight ahead, in the direction where that thing had crossed. I sat there frozen, hands sweating on the steering wheel, trying to process what I had just seen. My legs trembled, and I felt like any movement could attract that thing back. I looked around, hoping to see some sign that it was just my imagination, but the road was empty, covered by darkness and an oppressive silence. Even so, I had to get out of there. I took a deep breath, swallowed my fear, and started the car again. I accelerated slowly, avoiding looking to the sides, and focused only on getting out of that infernal road as quickly as possible. A few meters later, the sound of something hitting the rear window made me almost lose control of the car. It was as if someone or something was pounding on the glass with incredible force. I didn't dare look back. With each blow, the sound grew louder and more aggressive, as if it were getting impatient. I was already panicking, and all I could do was press the pedal as hard as I could, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Every second I felt the car nearly going out of control, but the fear of stopping was stronger than anything. Finally, I spotted what looked like the end of the dirt road. The lights of the main road appeared in the distance, and I felt such a huge relief that it nearly brought me to tears. The pounding on the glass stopped as soon as I reached the paved part, and silence returned, but in a different, more comforting way. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw nothing. No shadow, no sign of that terrifying presence. It was as if it had stayed behind, trapped in that dark road. I took a deep breath, and my body started to relax a bit, though my heart was still racing. When I got home that night, I went inside, locked the door, and sat in the living room, trying to understand what had happened. To this day, I can't say exactly what I saw or what chased me on that road. I've never told anyone about it, only writing it here because I know you all will understand. And if there's one thing I learned that night, it's that sometimes those shortcuts hide much more than just an alternative route. I never went down that road again, and honestly, I'd rather not know what goes on in that forest at night. My wife and I have always had a pretty ordinary life. We live in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where people still wave at each other from their windows, and the loudest sound you usually hear is the barking of dogs. Our routine was the same as any couple in their early 30s. Work, grocery shopping, dinner while watching a series, and then sleep. However, everything changed that week. It was right after an ordinary Friday, one of those days when you just want it to end so you can rest over the weekend. When I got home, I found a simple envelope with no seals or anything indicating where it had come from. At first, I thought it was some local service advertisement, but when I opened it, I realized it was a letter. And that's when things started to get strange. The paper was thick, textured, as if it had been torn from an old notebook. The handwriting was careful, somewhat formal, the kind you almost never see these days. The letter described in disturbing detail how my wife and I had spent the previous day. It mentioned my delayed lunch because the work meeting ran longer than it should have, how my wife tripped on the rug while trying to grab the phone, and even the argument we had about which movie to watch before bed. I swear I felt a cold shiver run up my spine as I read each line. There was no way anyone could know all of that, let alone with so many details. I showed the letter to my wife and she laughed, thinking it was some sick joke from a neighbor. I wanted to believe that too. But deep down, something told me there was something wrong, something more than just a prank. We decided to ignore it and throw the letter away. We tried not to think about it much. After all, who would spend time writing a letter about our day? But the next morning there was another envelope in our mailbox. This time, the handwriting was different, more rounded with scribbles, almost as if it had been written in a hurry, but the content was the same. A precise description of our previous day, including even more intimate details. Like the comment my wife made about me needing a haircut while we were in the kitchen, something no one could have heard. At this point, the discomfort had turned into fear. It was impossible to pretend that this was normal or just a joke. My wife and I started debating what to do. Should we call the police? Install cameras? But how could we justify this? After all, there was no clear threat, just descriptions, as if someone had been there all along watching us. I began to notice every car parked on the street, every person walking by. Who could be watching us? And why? My wife tried to stay calm, but I could see her gaze becoming more distant, as if she was always waiting for yet another letter. And, as expected, it came. In the third letter, the situation became even more disturbing. This time the envelope was on our doorstep, as if someone had just left it there. The handwriting was different again, shaky, full of corrections, as if the person was nervous. The letter mentioned a conversation my wife and I had about the future, a very personal subject we had spoken about quietly late at night when everyone in the neighborhood was already asleep. I could no longer ignore the fact that someone was watching us very closely. It was as if every aspect of our life was exposed to an invisible audience, and it was wearing us down emotionally. We started taking measures. We installed security cameras around the house, changed the locks, and even warned a few trusted neighbors to keep an eye out for any suspicious activity. For a few days, it seemed like the situation had improved. There were no more letters, and the tense atmosphere that had been hanging over our house began to dissipate. But on the fifth night after the last letter, while I was reviewing the camera footage, something caught my attention. There he was, a shadow of someone wearing a hood, standing in front of our door around 3 a.m. He didn't do anything but stand there for a few minutes, just staring at the house, and then left without leaving a trace. Seeing that was a punch to the gut. I showed the video to my wife, and her expression shifted from surprise to pure terror. Whoever it was knew exactly where the cameras were, because they never showed their face. The next day, another letter appeared, but this time it wasn't on the door or in the mailbox. We found the envelope in the middle of the living room on the coffee table. The handwriting was new, and the content was worse than before. It described exactly my reaction to seeing the shadow in the video the night before, described the fearful look on my wife's face, and the worst part was, the letter ended with a question. Are you going to keep trying to hide? That letter broke something inside me. I felt a mix of fear, anger, and helplessness. I called the police immediately, and this time they came. The officers examined the house, took notes, and installed a temporary monitoring device. They told us to stay calm and alert, but it was impossible. Whoever was doing this seemed to know every step we took. I spent that night awake, watching the door and the cameras, waiting for any sign of movement. My wife, by my side, couldn't sleep either. It felt like our own house didn't belong to us anymore, as if we were merely visitors in a life someone was manipulating. The next day, we did something we hadn't done before. We decided to leave the house and spend the night in a hotel. We thought it would give us some relief, maybe even distance us from the nightmare that seemed to be closing in on us. We chose a simple hotel, a few miles from home. We stayed in a small room with windows facing the main street. For the first time in weeks, my wife seemed a little more relaxed, as if being away from that environment could finally bring some comfort. But as evening fell, my phone vibrated with a notification that gave me a chill down my spine. It was a message from an unknown number. The message contained a photo. It was of our house, taken from the outside that same night. The image clearly showed that we were absent, almost as if it was a reminder that no matter where we went, someone was watching us. I showed the photo to my wife, and her face went pale. We decided not to respond, just locked the hotel room door and tried to stay calm. I felt a mix of panic and fury, wanting to confront whoever was doing this, but how do you face someone hiding in the shadows? There was no face, no name, no reason we could understand. The next morning we returned home. Everything was just as we had left it, but the silence felt thicker, oppressive. When we walked in, there was another envelope, this time on the kitchen table. The handwriting was familiar, the same as the first letter. The content, however, was different. There was no description of the previous day, just a warning. Last chance. That put me on high alert. I called the police again, and they promised to increase patrols in the area, but it felt like little compared to what we were living. I knew I had to do something different. I talked to my wife, and we made a difficult decision. It was time to leave that house. In a few days, we started packing our things. We hired a moving company and found a temporary place to stay on the other side of town. On the day we finally left, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. We didn't know if it would bring us peace, but it seemed like the only way out. And indeed, the letter stopped. It's been a few months since then, and we haven't received anything like that again. I still don't know who was watching us or why, but sometimes at night I still feel like I'm being watched. Maybe that feeling will never go away, but at least now we're trying to move on. I've never really believed in supernatural stories or unexplained phenomena. In fact, I've always been that skeptical guy who laughs when someone starts telling ghost stories. I've worked as a software engineer for over 10 years, so my mind is pretty logical and rational. Or at least it was until that night on July 15th, 2023, when something happened that completely changed my view of the world. I live alone in an apartment on the 10th floor of an old building in downtown Louisiana. It's one of those 70s buildings with long corridors and somewhat gloomy architecture, but I had never felt anything strange living there. At that time, I was going through a really stressful phase at work, coming home late every day and getting little sleep. On that specific night, I had stayed at the office until 11 p.m., finishing an important project that needed to be delivered the next day. I got home exhausted, took a quick shower, and practically collapsed in bed around midnight. My room is quite simple. A double bed against the wall, an old dark wooden wardrobe I inherited from my grandmother, and a desk with my work set up near the window. That night was particularly cold, so I wrapped myself tightly in the comforter and fell asleep almost instantly. A rare thing for me, as I've always had trouble falling asleep. I suddenly woke up in the middle of the night. The first thing I noticed was the absolute silence. I couldn't even hear the fan that I always leave on. I tried to move to check my phone and see the time, but my body didn't respond. It was like all my muscles were completely paralyzed, heavy as lead. I began to panic when I realized I could barely move my fingers or turn my head. The only thing I could move was my eyes. The room was shrouded in a darkness different from normal, denser, as if the darkness had a texture. The faint light that usually came through the window seemed to have been swallowed by this unnatural darkness. Then I realized the temperature had plummeted impossibly. It felt like I was lying on ice, a cold that penetrated to my bones. My breath formed a thick mist in the air, something that had never happened in my room before, not even on the coldest winter days in southern Brazil. The air was so dense and cold it hurt to breathe. And at that moment, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye that made my heart almost stop. A tall, dark silhouette, standing beside my bed, completely still. It was as if it was watching me, even though I couldn't make out any face or features in that mass of darkness. I tried to scream, to call for help, but no sound came out. It was as if my vocal cords were frozen. The figure remained there, motionless, and the more I tried to focus on it directly with my eyes, the more it seemed to dissolve into the shadows, only becoming clear when I looked at it peripherally. Panic overtook me as I struggled desperately against the paralysis. My rational mind tried to convince me it was just a nightmare, that I needed to wake up, but I knew I was fully conscious. I could feel every detail of the cold sheet against my skin, hear my own accelerated breathing, feel the crushing weight on my chest. The presence started to move, but not like a normal person would. It was a fluid motion, as if gliding over the floor without touching it. I realized it was coming closer to the bed, and the cold intensified to the point I thought my fingers would freeze and shatter. The air grew even heavier, as if I was breathing icy water. I tried to close my eyes, but it was impossible. They seemed forced to stay open, as if that thing wanted me to witness its presence. The wooden wardrobe began to creak, as if the extreme cold was causing the wood to contract. A low, deep humming started to fill the room, gradually increasing in intensity. It wasn't a sound coming from my ears or my head. I could feel the vibration in the walls, the mattress, in every bone in my body. The silhouette was now beside my pillow, and even without being able to see a face, I could feel it was staring at me intently. The smell in the room changed completely. It was a mix of old mold and something metallic like rust, but there was also a sweet, putrid odor that made me nauseous. It was a smell I had never encountered before, something that didn't seem to belong to our world. Then something happened that made my blood freeze even more. The figure leaned over me, and for the first time I could make out something on its face. Two deeply black points where its eyes should have been, darker than the surrounding darkness. It was like looking into two holes that led to absolute nothingness. The hum increased so much that I thought my eardrums would burst, and the temperature dropped even more. Now I could see a thin layer of ice forming on the walls of the room. My extremities were completely numb, and I began to feel I was losing consciousness due to the extreme cold. In a moment of absolute desperation, I managed to muster all my willpower and tried to move my pinky finger. It was the only part of my body I could still feel slightly. It was like trying to lift a ton with a strand of hair, but slowly, painfully, I managed to move it a few millimeters. This tiny movement seemed to break some sort of spell. The hum wavered like a radio out of tune, and the figure recoiled abruptly as if it had been shocked. My breathing was so shallow at that point that I could barely pull in air, and I started to see black spots in my vision as if I was about to faint. The entity, because now I was certain it wasn't something human, began to distort in an impossible way. It was like it was being sucked by something invisible, twisting at angles that defied physics. The putrid smell became unbearable, and I started to taste something metallic in my mouth, like I was chewing on copper coins. The wardrobe kept creaking louder and louder, and I could see cracks forming on the mirror of the door, creating a pattern that looked like a frozen spider web. The hum began to form something that almost sounded like a word, but it was too distorted to understand. Then, in the blink of an eye, everything stopped. The silence returned so abruptly that my ears hurt. The figure simply disappeared, not gradually, not dissolving. One moment it was there, the next it wasn't. The cold slowly began to diminish, and I felt the first tingles returning to my limbs. I was still paralyzed, but I could feel the crushing weight starting to lift. The cracks in the wardrobe mirror remained, proving that it hadn't been a hallucination. The smell still lingered in the air but was dissipating along with that abnormal darkness. I stayed in that state for a few more minutes that felt like hours, gradually regaining control of my body. When I finally managed to move, I practically jumped out of bed and ran to turn on all the lights in the apartment. It was 3:33 a.m., a detail I only noticed afterward, which sent even more chills down my spine. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the living room with all the lights on, shaking not just from the cold but from terror. The next morning I took pictures of the cracks in the mirror and noticed something that made me question my sanity even more. They formed a pattern that looked like a screaming face. After that night I began an obsessive search for answers. I researched sleep paralysis, paranormal phenomena, similar experiences, anything that could explain what had happened. I found several similar accounts on internet forums, but none mentioned the extreme cold or the cracks in the mirror. I consulted 3 different doctors, a neurologist, a psychiatrist, and even a sleep disorder specialist. I had several tests done, but everything came back normal. The neurologist suggested it was a severe episode of sleep paralysis combined with hypnagogic hallucinations, but that didn't explain the cracks in the mirror or the ice that had formed on the walls. I had pictures of everything. In the following weeks, I began to notice small, strange things in the apartment. Objects that would shift slightly during the night, unexplained moisture spots on the walls that would appear and disappear, and most disturbingly, that peculiar smell that would return every now and then, always very faint, like a reminder of what had happened. The most unsettling thing was that every time I woke up in the middle of the night, which started happening frequently, the clock always showed 3:33. It was as if something was toying with me, taunting me. I even installed security cameras in the bedroom, but every time something strange happened, the footage would be distorted or the camera would simply stop working. I ended up making a radical decision. I moved out of the apartment a month later. I couldn't stand living with that constant feeling of being watched, with the fear of sleeping and waking up with that presence by my side again. I moved to a new, well-lit condo on a lower floor with neighbors close by. I only took the essentials. I left the wardrobe and anything else from the old room behind. I didn't want any connection to that night. The first few weeks in the new apartment were peaceful, and I started to think maybe I had left it all behind. But last night, exactly 3 months after the first incident, I woke up with that same intense cold sensation. My muscles started to feel heavy, and for a moment, I thought I saw a familiar shadow out of the corner of my eye. I forced myself to get up before the paralysis completely overtook me and ran out of the bedroom. I spent the night wide awake, with all the lights on, determined to share my story here. I don't know if that thing will come back. I don't know what it wants, and honestly, I don't know what to do if it appears again. All I know is that nothing the doctors say can fully explain what happened that night, and every time I catch that characteristic smell or see 3:33 on the clock, my entire body freezes with fear. I've been working as a nurse for almost 8 years, always taking night shifts. I've never been one to believe in supernatural stories or anything like that. I've always had my feet on the ground and a very skeptical mind. I think the job itself molded me this way, you know? Dealing with life and death daily makes you develop a certain pragmatism. But what happened to me in March this year completely changed how I see things. To this day, I can't rationally explain what I witnessed that night, and I've tried to come up with countless logical explanations. It was a particularly quiet Tuesday night at the hospital. The weather was a bit strange, with a light drizzle and a dense fog that gave the city a somewhat eerie look. I had just finished my first round of the night around 11:30 p.m. Our team was reduced because 2 colleagues were out with COVID, so I was covering the east wing on the 3rd floor alone, a section normally shared by 2 nurses. The wing was almost empty, with only 3 patients, all in stable condition and asleep when I checked their vitals. I was sitting at the nurses' station, updating the medication logs, when I noticed a strange movement out of the corner of my eye. The station is right in the middle of the main corridor, with a glass window allowing a full view of the wing's activity. It was nearly 1 a.m. when I saw, very briefly, someone in the typical blue hospital gown crossing the hallway. The person seemed disoriented, walking slowly and somewhat unsteadily like they were lost. What caught my attention was the way they moved. Something was off, but I couldn't pinpoint what at that moment. I immediately stood up to check. After all, that wing only had 3 patients, all in the rooms on the right side. The person had come from one of the rooms on the left, which were all empty. I grabbed my flashlight, since some of the hallway lights are turned off at night to avoid disturbing the patients, and went to investigate. I called out loud, "Hello? Do you need help?" My voice echoed down the empty hallway, but I got no response. When I reached the corner where the person had turned, there was absolutely no one. It was a dead-end corridor with only a locked service door at the end leading to the emergency stairs. I checked each of the rooms in that section, one by one. I entered every room, checked the bathrooms, looked under the beds. Nothing. A chill ran down my spine because I was absolutely sure of what I'd seen. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The floor of the hallway was completely dry, with no sign of footprints. This would be impossible considering it was drizzling outside, and anyone who had recently entered would have left some moisture on the floor. I stood there for a few minutes, trying to process that information, when the radio in my pocket crackled. It was Rose, the nursing technician on the second floor. She wanted to know if I could come down to help with a restless patient. I was actually relieved to have an excuse to leave. The empty hallway had taken on a heavy, different atmosphere. Before going down, I quickly stopped by the nurse's station to grab some things, and that's when I noticed something disturbing. The computer where I had been updating the logs was turned off. Not in sleep mode, but completely off. I tried to turn it on again, but it wouldn't respond, as if it were unplugged, which was impossible since the power source was screwed in under the desk. I went down to the second floor, still trying to find rational explanations for what was happening. I helped Rose with the patient, a man with Alzheimer's having an episode of confusion, and ended up staying there for about 40 minutes. When I returned to the third floor, I had that horrible feeling that someone was watching me. You know when you feel a pair of eyes on your back? It was exactly like that. The hallway seemed darker and colder than usual, even though the air conditioning was set to its regular temperature. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, affected by the earlier strange events. I stopped by the nurse's station, and surprisingly, the computer was working normally. All the logs I was updating were still there, saved. That made no sense at all. I decided to do another round in the occupied rooms to distract myself. In the first room, Mrs. Maria was sleeping soundly. In the second, Mr. Jose was also resting without any issues. But when I opened the door to the third room, where Mr. Antonio, a 78-year-old man admitted with pneumonia, was staying, I felt my heart stop for a second. The bed was empty, with the sheets all messed up. I rushed to the bathroom in the room, calling his name, but got no response. Panic started to set in when I realized that the blue gown I had seen earlier was exactly like the one Mr. Antonio was wearing. I stumbled into the hallway, completely disoriented, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. That's when I heard a noise coming from the end of the hallway, the same spot where the figure had disappeared before. It was a metallic sound, like someone trying to open the emergency stairwell door. Even though every fiber of my being was begging me to run in the opposite direction, I knew I had to check it out. Mr. Antonio was my responsibility, and if he was confused and trying to leave that way, he could seriously hurt himself. I pulled out my phone to use as a flashlight, since I'd left the other one at the station, and walked slowly toward the sound. With each step, the temperature seemed to drop a few more degrees. The metallic noise continued, in a nearly hypnotic rhythm, as if someone were lightly tapping on the door. Tap, tap, tap. When I got close enough to illuminate the area, the noise stopped abruptly. The emergency stairwell door was closed, but something was different about it. I brought the light closer and felt my stomach sink. There were wet fingerprints on the doorknob, as if someone with soaking hands had tried to open it. But the most disturbing part was that the marks looked old, slightly yellowed as if they'd been there for a long time, which was impossible because I was certain they hadn't been there earlier. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. That's when its light flickered 3 times and went out. The battery had died, even though it was at 85% just moments before. I stood paralyzed in the dark, feeling the cold air wrapping around my body. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of my rapid breathing and the beating of my heart. Then I heard something that made every hair on my body stand up. Wet footsteps. They started slowly, coming from behind me. Splash, splash, splash. It wasn't the sound of shoes on the floor, but rather the sound of bare, wet feet dragging across the ground, and they were getting closer. I turned slowly, trembling so much I could barely stand. That's when I saw it. At the end of the hallway, partially illuminated by the faint light coming from the nurse's station window, was a figure in a hospital gown. But there was something profoundly wrong with it. The gown was soaked, clinging to the body, and water was constantly dripping, forming a puddle on the floor. The person, or whatever it was, stood with its back to me, head tilted slightly to the side at an angle that seemed painfully unnatural. Its bare feet were darkened as if in decay. I tried to scream, to call for help, but no sound came out of my mouth. My whole body was shaking and I felt like I would pass out at any moment. That's when the figure started to turn, very slowly. First, the head, twisting at an even sharper angle, as if there were no bones or muscles to limit the movement. I saw part of the face. The skin had a greenish hue, the lips were purple, and the eyes were completely white, without irises or pupils. A grotesque smile spread across its face, revealing blackened teeth. At that moment, my legs finally responded, and I ran. I ran like I had never run before. I stumbled down the stairs, nearly falling several times. When I reached the 2nd floor, I found Rose in the hallway and practically fell into her arms, sobbing and shaking. She called other staff members, and a security team went up to check the 3rd floor. Guess what? Mr. Antonio was sleeping peacefully in his bed, as if he'd never left. The floor was completely dry, with no trace of water, and the emergency stairwell door had no marks on it. They tried to convince me I had fallen asleep and dreamed, or that I was overly stressed. But I know what I saw. The next day, still deeply shaken, I researched the hospital's history. That's when I discovered something that made me question everything I believed until then. Exactly 27 years ago, a patient had died in the old hydrotherapy wing, which was located right where the dead-end corridor on the 3rd floor is now. According to records, she was wearing a blue gown when she was found. The most disturbing part? She was reportedly seen wandering the hallways hours after she was found, leaving wet footprints wherever she went. The next day I requested a transfer to the day shift and never worked at night again. To this day, when I pass by that hallway during the day, I feel a cold chill down my spine. And sometimes, just sometimes, when I glance quickly, I swear I see a puddle forming on the floor even on the driest days of the year. I've never been one to be impressed by nightmares. Since I was young, I learned to ignore that uneasy feeling that sometimes appears after waking up sweaty in the middle of the night. But that night was different. I'd come back from a friend's place and lay down late, already past 2 in the morning. As usual, I put on a playlist playing softly and fell asleep within minutes, exhausted. I woke up with a jolt, the kind that almost throws you out of bed, and realized I was drenched in cold sweat. It was the kind of nightmare that traps you in a scene so absurd, yet so vivid, it feels like it lasted an eternity. In the nightmare, I was on a street that seemed familiar, but something was off. The houses, the trees, everything looked exaggerated, as if every detail was there to make me feel uncomfortable, something out of place. I walked down this deserted street, and the only thing I could hear was the sound of my footsteps echoing. At some point, I began to feel someone watching me. I looked back, but all I could see were shadows, figures moving too fast to make out. When I finally stopped walking, I felt a presence right behind me, and a low voice whispered my name. That made me wake up instantly, still hearing that whisper in my head. I lay there for a few seconds, trying to understand what I'd just dreamt. The room was dark, and the only sound I could hear was the faint hum of the playlist still playing, slightly distorted, adding to the heavy atmosphere. I took a deep breath, tried to calm myself down, and thought it was just another one of those weird dreams. Nothing more. Until suddenly my phone vibrated. Who the hell would be calling me at this hour? It was almost 3 a.m. I looked at the screen, still half asleep, and felt a chill run down my spine. The number was unknown. My first thought was that it might be some emergency, a family member, so I answered without hesitation. When I put the phone to my ear, I heard breathing on the other end. "Hello?" I said, trying to hide my apprehension. The breathing continued for a few seconds, heavy and uneven, as if the person was just standing there listening. Then, a voice, and here is where my heart practically stopped, began to speak in a low, dragged tone, exactly like the voice I'd heard in my dream. "You woke up fast," said the person, or the thing, whatever it was. My body froze. It was impossible. I knew I was awake, and I knew this voice, which seemed like an echo straight from the nightmare, was no figment of my imagination. My hand started shaking as I held the phone. I tried to come up with a logical explanation, but nothing made sense. I asked who was speaking, trying to sound firm, but the voice on the other end only let out a low, muffled laugh and said, "You know me. I was just with you." Hearing that, a chill went through my entire body. It was as if each word pulled me back into the nightmare, to that dark, empty street. My instinct was to hang up, but it felt like my fingers wouldn't obey. Something about that voice paralyzed me in a way I'd never felt before. The silence in the room became heavy, almost suffocating. The voice continued, whispering nonsensical things, fragmented phrases that only deepened my discomfort. It spoke of things I didn't remember, places I had no idea about, yet they somehow felt strangely familiar. Then, in one of those stray phrases, I heard something that chilled me to the bone. The voice mentioned my childhood, an incident that happened when I was 7, something I'd never told anyone. I nearly dropped the phone. How could someone know that? At that moment, I started doubting if I was really awake. I looked around the room, searching for something that would confirm that this wasn't just a continuation of the nightmare. But everything was there. My lamp, the pile of clothes on the chair, the fan beside the bed. Every detail seemed to confirm that I was indeed awake. And still, that voice, that presence, it felt as though something had crossed from the dream into reality. Overwhelmed, I asked once more who it was and why they were calling me, but the response came as an almost inaudible whisper. "You already know. You just need to remember." That was the last straw. I hung up abruptly and tossed the phone onto the bed, breathing heavily, trying to process what had just happened. I could still feel the presence of that person, or whatever it was, lingering over me, even after I'd hung up. I stayed there, frozen, trying to hear any sound in the absolute silence of the room. Fear took over. I knew that somehow that being, that voice, had a connection to something from my past, but it was a past I'd never touched, something I didn't even want to remember. The room felt increasingly suffocating, as if the air itself was thick with that presence. I picked up the phone again, and without thinking much, went to my call history. The number was still there, but there was no other information. I decided to try calling back, hoping someone would answer and reveal that it was all just a sick joke. But when I dialed, the sound on the other end was only static, a noise that seemed to pulse, sometimes soft, sometimes loud, as if it were trying to recreate something. I listened for a few seconds until I realized that noise was changing. It was as if the voice was returning, trying to form words. I hung up immediately, my heart racing. I sat on the bed for a long time, trying to calm down, but the fear wouldn't go away. I decided to get up and walk around the house, turning on some lights to feel safe. I passed through the living room, the kitchen, and everything seemed in order. Yet there was something strange in the air. A heavy silence. That's when I approached the window and saw something that made me question my sanity. Across the street, under a streetlight, there was someone standing. A figure I could barely see, but it looked like it was staring right at me. It was like being back on that street in the nightmare. My feet stayed rooted to the floor, and fear kept me from closing the curtain. I stood there staring at that silhouette until it started moving, slowly, as if it were walking towards me. When I finally regained movement, I yanked the curtain shut with all my strength, locked the window, and secured every door in the house. I ran back to the bedroom, feeling like a kid scared of the dark. I threw myself onto the bed, covered my head, and for the first time in years prayed that this was just an illusion brought on by exhaustion, stress, anything. I don't know how long I lay there, but eventually, I started calming down, and the silence in the room returned to normal. When I finally looked at my phone again, I noticed that the call history had disappeared, as if that call had never happened. I don't know what that was, who or what I saw or heard, or why it seemed to know so much about me. But since that night, I haven't been able to sleep in peace. From time to time, I still wake up in the middle of the night, feeling as though someone's watching me, and that at any moment, my phone might ring again. When Louisa and I decided to move, the last thing we expected was to find an old house at such a good price. I still remember the first time we visited the place. It had that worn-out charm with thick walls, creaky wooden floors, and a huge attic. It was the kind of house that seemed to have its own story, you know? We even joked about how an old house like that must have a past, but honestly, we didn't take it seriously. We moved in with the excitement of starting a life together, and I, who was never superstitious, thought the sounds around the place were just the old wooden floor settling. But over time, those sounds began to feel different. The first night we heard something strange was about 2 weeks after moving in. We were in bed, almost asleep, when we heard a noise upstairs, like something heavy had fallen in the attic. I thought it was in our heads after all. It was an old house, but Louisa looked at me startled and said she heard it too. It was late, and I was tired, so I tried to calm her down, saying it was probably just a bird that got in or some small animal. I was starting to convince myself it was a simple explanation, but then the sound came back. This time, it sounded like something was being dragged. The next day, I went up to the attic to check it out. I grabbed a flashlight because the attic light was too dim, and the place had this strange smell, a mix of dust and dampness, kind of sour, you know? I looked around every corner, and there was absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. Just boxes of old stuff, huge cobwebs, and a dusty mirror at the far end. It looked like any old attic. I thought maybe the noise could be the wood settling with the weight of the boxes. Feeling relieved, I went back downstairs and told Louisa I hadn't seen anything unusual up there. We laughed it off, agreeing it was all in our heads, that we were just paranoid about being in a new house. But the next night, the noise returned. This time, it was more intense, like someone was walking back and forth up there, dragging something across the floor. And it wasn't just once. The sound came and went, almost like it had a pattern, a kind of persistence that made it impossible to relax. This time, I have to admit, I was genuinely bothered. Louisa and I sat on the bed, in silence, staring at the ceiling and listening to those footsteps. It couldn't just be the house creaking on its own. The worst part was the silence that followed each session of noises, like whatever it was knew we were listening. The next morning, with a bit more courage, I decided to install a camera up there. Louisa and I were tired of losing sleep, and we needed some sort of explanation, no matter how absurd it might be. The camera was a simple one, but it had night vision. I positioned it at an angle that covered most of the attic, and as I was setting it up, I found myself looking at the old mirror at the far end. Something about it always unsettled me. Maybe the way it reflected the dimness, giving the impression that someone else was there. But I brushed it off and went back to the bedroom, confident that we'd finally uncover what was causing the noises that night. That night, the sound started earlier than usual. We hadn't even turned off the lights yet when we heard that same constant dragging. I looked at Louisa, and her face was pale. I tried to pretend I was calm, but the truth was I was nervous too. We went straight to the phone screen where the camera was streaming live. At first, everything was still, just that dark, dusty scene with a grainy image. But then, something caught our attention. The mirror. It looked like something moved across it, a quick shadow that was hard to make out. Louisa nearly dropped the phone when we saw it. I thought about going up there again, seeing it with my own eyes, but something told me it was better to stay put, to watch from afar. And then, as if wanting to send us a message, the noise got louder. It was no longer dragging, but something like rhythmic, violent thuds on the floor. I felt a tightness in my chest, my heart racing, and Louisa was gripping my hand so hard it almost hurt. The silence after the thuds was suffocating, as if the whole house was waiting for our reaction. We stayed there, frozen, and just when I thought I could breathe again, the sound stopped out of nowhere. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the house felt heavy. I tried to act like everything was normal, but Louisa could no longer hide her fear. She said she was dreaming about the mirror almost every night, like something inside it was watching us. I even thought about taking it down, throwing it away, or at least covering it with a cloth. But at the same time, something stopped me, like it was better not to mess with what we didn't understand. Every night the sounds grew more intense, and I felt like we were getting closer to something, but without knowing exactly what. After several more sleepless nights, I'd had enough. I decided we needed to call someone who knew more about this stuff than we did. I searched online and found a guy who claimed to be a paranormal expert from the next town over. Louisa, who'd always been more skeptical than I was so terrified that she didn't even question the idea. Deep down, I think she just wanted an explanation that made sense. Anything that could help us understand what was happening in that attic. We scheduled a visit for the next day, and that brought us a little peace, like we were finally in control of the situation. When the so-called expert arrived, he was an older man with a graying beard and deep-set eyes that seemed to see beyond the obvious. He listened to us attentively, without any hint of disbelief or mockery, which made me feel less foolish for calling someone like him. When we mentioned the mirror, he looked visibly interested and asked to go upstairs immediately. We followed him to the attic, and as soon as we crossed the door, he stopped, looked around with a serious expression, and asked us to remain silent. He said there was a strange energy there, something trapped between worlds, as he put it. The man slowly walked up to the mirror and, without touching it, just stared at the reflection in silence. Louisa and I were nervous, but we didn't dare say a word. After what felt like an eternity, he turned to us and said we couldn't keep the mirror any longer. This thing is like a portal. Someone or something got trapped in it and wants to get out. Every time you hear those noises, it's this thing trying to cross over. My knees nearly gave out hearing that. I'd never believed much in these things, but the way he spoke with such conviction made my skin crawl. It felt like he knew exactly what he was talking about. He instructed us to cover the mirror with a thick cloth and take it far away, preferably to a calm place. It sounded crazy, but by that point, we were willing to do anything to get our peace back. That same afternoon, we found an old, thick cloth, covered the mirror, and put it in the car trunk. We drove to a remote area outside town, near a lake where no one ever went. We didn't say a word during the drive. We both knew it was something we could never explain or forget. We left the mirror there without looking back. That night, for the first time in weeks, the house was silent. There were no more dragging sounds, no footsteps, no noises coming from the attic. Louisa and I sat in silence for a while, just absorbing the peace that was slowly filling the rooms. We didn't go to sleep right away. We stayed sitting on the bed, processing everything, as if waiting for the sound to start again at any moment. But nothing happened. It was like the house was finally at rest. The feeling of relief was so immense I could hardly believe it. Louisa held my hand and smiled, bringing me a calm I hadn't felt in a long time. The days that followed were strangely normal, almost unsettling. Every time I went up to the attic to grab something or just to make sure everything was in order, I felt a void, an absence that hadn't been there before. I can't explain it, but it felt like the space had lost that weight, that presence that made the air thick and oppressive. The boxes were all in place, The wooden floor creaked as always, but now the space just felt empty. The strangest part was realizing how the absence of something I barely understood left me uneasy, like something was missing. A few weeks later, Louisa and I decided to visit the lake where we left the mirror, more for symbolic closure than anything else. We wanted to see if it was still there, maybe to convince ourselves that it all really happened and wasn't just some collective paranoia. When we arrived, we couldn't find the mirror. We searched the area, calling each other's names as if one of us had moved it as a joke, but it was simply gone. We tried to convince ourselves that someone else might have taken it, but the uncomfortable feeling returned. It was like the mirror had vanished on purpose. To this day, we're not sure what that mirror was or what really caused the noises in the house. We haven't heard anything since we got rid of it, but every now and then, Louisa wakes up scared, saying she saw a shadow in the reflection of the mirror in our bedroom. I always tell her it's all in her head, but to be honest, when she falls back asleep, I'm afraid to look at the mirror too. Sometimes I feel like this story isn't over, like we left something unfinished in that attic. It's an irrational fear, but a real one. Maybe someday we'll find out what really happened. For now, I'd rather not try to find out. I've always been a skeptical guy, you know? Never believed in the supernatural or things outside of logic. For me, everything has always had a rational explanation, and maybe that's why I didn't give much thought to these strange dreams that started happening last year. At the time, I'd been living alone for about 2 years in a quiet neighborhood. My routine was simple: work, gym, and on Friday nights, dinner with friends. Nothing unusual or scary. But suddenly, nights started to feel dark. Instead of waking up refreshed, I'd get up with this lingering sense of unease. Dreams, which were once rare, became frequent and took on a very specific form. It was always the same theme: someone or something trying to get into my house. The first time I dreamed about it was on an ordinary Tuesday night. I remember being exhausted, falling asleep quickly, and suddenly, there I was, standing in my living room, but with a heavy, almost suffocating atmosphere. I couldn't see who was outside clearly, but I could feel a presence. It was a tall figure, part human, part animal. The silhouette looked like a man, but something was off. The outlines were irregular, like his body was somehow distorted, twisted in an unnatural way. In that first dream, he just stood outside, in front of the living room window, one hand almost touching the glass. When I woke up, the relief of being safe in my bed was quickly replaced by the memory of that bizarre figure. The dreams continued, but things started to change. Suddenly, it wasn't just a presence outside. In each new dream, it seemed bolder, closer. In one of them, I remember seeing it trying to open the front door. The creature held the doorknob and pulled, but never managed to get inside. I saw myself just standing there, hypnotized, unable to move, just watching that silent, desperate attempt of someone, or something, trying to invade my space. I can't explain it, but each time I woke up, I felt a fear that went beyond the dream. It was as if that feeling clung to me, like it was still out there, lurking. As the days went by, I started avoiding sleep. Nights turned into a mixture of anxiety and exhaustion, a type of unease I had never felt before. I knew that if I slept, it would be there, waiting. The worst part is that even when I was awake, I sometimes caught a shadow moving out of the corner of my eye, or heard a muffled sound. I tried convincing myself it was all in my head, maybe just sleep deprivation. But deep down, I already sensed it was more than that. Something was happening, and I couldn't ignore it. Over time, the dreams grew more intense. It was like it was getting impatient, more persistent. One night, I remember it started the same way. I was in the living room. The silence was absolute, but the atmosphere was so heavy it felt like the air was poisoned. I smelled something metallic like blood in the air, and the sound of heavy breathing echoed around, even though I was there alone. When I looked at the door, it was closer than ever, pressing its face against the glass of the window. I could make out the shape of its head better, with a kind of short snout and sharp teeth protruding from a twisted mouth. The eyes were two dark patches, lifeless. It was human, but not completely. When I woke up, the terror was so real that I nearly fell out of bed. My heart was pounding and sweat dripped down my face. It took me a few minutes to understand I was in my room, safe, or at least that's what I tried to believe. I got up, went to the kitchen for a glass of water, and as I passed by the living room, I couldn't resist looking at the window. It was irrational, I knew, but I felt the need to make sure everything was normal. When I looked, the glass reflected my pale face, but a shadow seemed to be creeping in the distance, in the yard. I blinked and it was gone, but that feeling of not being alone lingered. I started talking about these dreams with some friends, trying to vent and see if they had any logical explanation. They laughed, saying I was overworking or watching too many horror movies. Deep down, I knew it was more than that. The dream, or whatever it was, seemed to be growing, getting bolder. I started making small changes around the house, like locking the windows and leaving lights on in the living room and hallway at night. But none of it eased the fear. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of that figure returned, and each time it seemed more real. One of those nights, things reached a peak. I dreamed I was in the living room again, but this time something was different. I felt it had gotten past the door, that there was no longer anything between us. I heard slow, dragging footsteps and breathing so heavy it made the walls vibrate. I couldn't move. It was like I was glued to the floor, frozen with terror. It kept getting closer, and I knew that this time it wasn't just trying to scare me. When I finally managed to move, I woke up with a jolt, but something was wrong. The air in the room was cold, and I felt as if someone, or something, had been there with me. After that night, I simply couldn't sleep properly anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, that figure came back, clearer and more threatening each time. The worst part was that, even awake, the feeling of being watched lingered. One night, sitting on the couch, I even heard strange noises outside, like branches breaking or slow footsteps over dry leaves in the yard. My first reaction was to turn on all the lights in the house, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But the silence returned, and with it the unsettling idea that that being was stalking me, like a predator watching its prey. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't prove it. I decided to install security cameras, more to reassure myself than actually expecting to see anything. For the first few days, nothing unusual showed up on the recordings, and I started to think maybe it was all paranoia. But then, one night when I'd finally managed to fall asleep, I was woken up by a sound that chilled me to the bone. It was a slow, constant scratching, like nails scraping on wood. When I got up to check the cameras, the sight was chilling. Outside, by the living room window, a shadow moved, tall and distorted with that familiar human-animal outline. That was the first time I saw the visitor outside of my dreams, and let me tell you, it was much worse in real life. The figure seemed to stretch like it had bones that bent in the wrong directions. Every movement was slow and calculated, and although I couldn't see its face clearly, I felt those empty eyes staring straight at me. I stood paralyzed, my heart racing, as the figure kept moving closer to the window. It was only when it lifted one of its long, deformed hands that I snapped out of it, ran to turn off the lights, and hid in my room. I locked the door and stayed there, breathing deeply, hoping the thing would leave. After that day, the atmosphere in my house changed completely. I couldn't stay alone without feeling it was nearby, lurking. Even friends who came over commented on how the place felt colder, darker. I started seriously considering moving, but at the same time I felt an inexplicable fear that it would follow me. It was as if the creature had latched onto me, and no matter where I went, it would find a way to show up. I knew I had to do something, or I'd end up going crazy. After weeks of living in this constant state of alert, I decided to do something more practical. I talked to a friend who knew a bit about energies and spirituality, and he suggested I try some kind of cleansing for the house. Honestly, I didn't believe in it much, but I was so desperate that anything seemed better than continuing in this nightmare. On the scheduled day, he brought incense, crystals, and performed a kind of ritual, walking through each room, muttering words I barely understood. Even though I was skeptical, I have to admit that for a moment the atmosphere felt lighter, like that thing had finally given up on me. That night I slept deeply for the first time in months. When I woke up, the relief was so overwhelming that I was almost in shock, unable to believe I'd finally spent a whole night without the constant fear of that figure. But just to be safe, I kept the lights on and the security cameras running. The following days were peaceful, and I began to feel that maybe I'd managed to get rid of that presence. It was strange, but somehow the house felt more mine again, like that weight had lifted for good. It was only a week later that I decided to review the security footage from that night, more out of curiosity than anything else. I watched the videos without much expectation, skimming through each minute. But in one of the clips, around 3 a.m, I noticed a shadow. My heart nearly stopped. It was the same figure standing right in front of the window, motionless. But the scariest part was the last moment of the recording. It looked directly at the camera, and for a split second I saw its face clearly. A vacant, almost mocking stare, as if it knew that nothing I did could stop it from finding me. Since then, I haven't seen the creature again, but the image of that look haunts me to this day. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the house and the silence grows heavy, I still feel a presence, like it's there, quietly waiting. Maybe it's left me alone, or maybe it's just waiting for the right time to return. All I know is that I'll never forget that figure, nor the fear it brought. One day I might have to face it again, but for now all I can do is keep watch and try not to think too much about what was truly lurking that night. I grew up on a small farm that my family and I called home for as long as I can remember. This place, tucked away from town, was surrounded by endless fields, thick trees, and a quiet that at times felt almost unnatural. We didn't have neighbors close by, just the open land stretching for miles in every direction. My dad would always joke about how our closest friends were the crows that hung around our cornfield, but on stormy nights, that joke didn't feel so funny. Something about the isolation made the dark seem darker, the silence heavier, especially when it rained. One night, a storm hit out of nowhere. It was one of those sudden wild storms that seem to come with no warning, no gradual build-up, just rain slamming down and thunder rolling in close. I was with my younger sister in the living room, trying to ignore the wind rattling the windows, when my dad called us over to the back door. He had that tone in his voice that was serious but calm, the kind of tone he'd use if he saw a coyote near the house. My mom joined us, and when we all looked out, there was something, or rather, someone, standing in the middle of the field. At first I thought it was maybe a tree or a trick of the light. The rain was pouring so hard it was hard to see clearly. But as lightning flashed across the sky, it lit up the figure standing there. It wasn't close, maybe about 50 yards from the house, but it was unmistakable. A tall, dark silhouette, completely still, facing us, just standing there. My sister squeezed my hand, and I could feel her trembling. None of us said anything. We just stared, almost as if we were waiting for it to do something, anything, to prove we weren't seeing things. Minutes passed, but it felt like an eternity. The figure never moved. It just stayed there, as if watching us. The rain wasn't letting up, so my dad finally decided to go out and see what it was. He told us to stay inside, but as he stepped out onto the porch, I couldn't help but follow, staying a few steps behind. My mom tried to hold my sister back, but I knew we were all curious, or maybe just too scared to be apart. With the flashlight in one hand and his rifle in the other, my dad walked slowly towards the figure. Every step he took seemed to echo louder than the rain and thunder combined. But as he got closer, something strange happened. The figure didn't react, didn't turn, didn't move. And then, just as my dad was about 20 feet away, he stopped. The figure was gone. Just gone. One moment it was there, and the next it wasn't. My dad swung the flashlight around, but there was nothing, just an empty field and the relentless rain. When he walked back towards us, his face was pale, his jaw clenched tight. I could tell he didn't want to scare us, but the look in his eyes told me he was just as shaken as we were. Back inside, we all tried to act like nothing had happened. My mom made some tea, my sister wrapped herself in a blanket, and we all sat in silence listening to the storm. But then, just when I thought maybe we could brush it off as some kind of optical illusion, or just our minds playing tricks on us, my dad looked out the window again. His face went white, and without a word, he pointed. Right there, in the exact same spot, was the figure again. We all froze, staring out the window, unable to believe what we were seeing. The figure was back, standing in that same eerie stillness, completely unaffected by the rain or the thunder that seemed to shake the ground. It was like it had never left. My sister whispered, asking if it could be some kind of scarecrow, but we didn't own one. And besides, no scarecrow moves like that. Even with the storm raging around us, there was something almost unnatural about how quiet it felt in that moment, like everything was holding its breath, waiting. My dad didn't hesitate this time. He grabbed his flashlight again, along with a heavy coat, and told us he'd be right back. My mom tried to convince him to stay, but he was determined. As he stepped outside, the rain seemed to swallow him up, and all we could do was watch from the window, our eyes glued to that figure. My mom kept the door slightly open, so we could hear him yell if he needed anything. I could feel my heart pounding, every muscle in my body tense as I waited. He got closer and closer, shining his flashlight right where the figure stood, but it didn't budge. He called out, his voice strong but wary, demanding to know who was out there. There was no response, just the relentless downpour and the wind howling through the trees. My dad walked closer, almost within reach of the figure now, and for a split second I thought I saw it shift, just slightly, like it was breathing. But as he swung the light back and forth, we all saw it. There was nothing there, just empty space where the figure had been moments before. When he came back inside, dripping wet and visibly shaken, he didn't say anything at first. He just sat down at the kitchen table, staring at his hands. Finally, he told us he had found something, a set of footprints deep in the mud, leading up to the spot where the figure had stood. But here's the strangest part. The footprints just stopped. No tracks leading away, no sign of anyone or anything. They just ended, like whoever or whatever had been there had simply vanished. We all sat there in silence, trying to process what he was telling us. My mom kept glancing back at the window as if expecting the figure to reappear at any moment. My sister was pale, her hands trembling as she clutched her mug. For the rest of the night, none of us slept. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind had us on edge. The storm eventually passed, but that feeling of being watched lingered, heavy and oppressive, like a shadow that wouldn't leave. In the morning, we went out to the field together to see the footprints for ourselves. Sure enough, they were there, clear as day, leading up to that same spot, and then nothing. My dad tried to brush it off, saying maybe the rain had washed away the rest of the tracks, but we all knew that didn't explain what we'd seen. That day, as the sun rose and the fields glistened with rain, the fear started to fade. But even now, years later, every time a storm rolls in, I can't help but glance out the window, half expecting to see that dark figure standing in the field, watching. I used to visit my friend Matt's house every week, practically since we met in school. This started about 3 years ago when he and his mom moved into that house. It was a large Victorian-style house in a quiet neighborhood in the city. I never thought much about the place until, little by little, I began to notice a strange feeling every time I was there. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. The house was old, with those long hallways and dark wooden doors that made you feel like you were being watched. But over time, it got worse, and I didn't know if it was all in my head or if something was really off. Matt didn't seem to notice anything strange. To him, the house was just old and charming, as he would say. I tried to agree, but every time I reached the front door, I felt a chill go up my spine. You know that feeling when you sense someone staring at you? That was exactly it. The first time I really thought about saying something to him was after a particularly weird episode. We were playing video games in the basement, where he'd set up a sort of game room, and suddenly, we heard a door slam upstairs, like there was a gust of wind, but all the windows were closed. Matt laughed, saying it was probably just the house talking. I laughed along, but that strange feeling only grew stronger. After that, I started paying more attention to the sounds and the overall atmosphere of the house. There was one thing that wouldn't leave me alone: the attic. It was a place Matt said he never went because it had been locked since they moved in. According to him, his mom had stored some old family belongings up there and no one ever touched it. But every now and then, I'd hear noises coming from there. They weren't typical sounds, like creaks from an old house. It was more like light footsteps, as if someone was walking back and forth. I tried to ignore it, but I always found myself looking up at the ceiling, waiting to hear something again. One night, after we'd played late into the evening, I was walking up the stairs to leave and I thought I saw a shadow at the end of the second-floor hallway. It was quick, but it was there. I stopped halfway up the stairs and just stared at the spot. When I realized it, Matt was calling me from the door, asking what I was waiting for. I just said I was thinking about something and ran down. After that night, things started to get more intense, and it was as if the house somehow knew I'd noticed something different about it. On the next few visits, I already arrived at the house with that weight in my chest. It was like the air there was denser, almost suffocating. One day, while we were watching a movie in the living room, the silence was suddenly broken by a loud sound from upstairs. It sounded like furniture being dragged, but it was just the two of us there, and Matt's mom was away visiting relatives. I looked at him expecting some kind of reaction, but he just shrugged, like it was the most normal noise in the world. I tried to brush it off, but that unease wouldn't go away. A few weeks later, something happened that made me seriously consider stopping my visits. I was alone in the kitchen grabbing a glass of water when I clearly heard someone calling my name. It was a low voice, almost a whisper, coming from the hallway. My first thought was that it was Matt playing a prank on me, but when I went to the living room, he was there, focused on his phone, completely unbothered. I asked if he'd called me, and he just shook his head without even looking up. That really unsettled me. I'd never been one to believe in supernatural stuff, but that experience made me question things a bit. After that, I avoided being alone anywhere in the house. If Matt left the room, I'd go with him, and if I had to go upstairs to use the bathroom, I'd hurry as much as possible. Even he started noticing and asked if something was wrong. I just said his house had a weird vibe, but I tried not to go into details. Matt laughed, a bit confused, but agreed that it was a place full of history. But for me, it was more than that. It was like every corner of the house hid something I didn't want to find out. One night, when it was really late, Matt's mom came into the living room looking a bit confused. She asked if either of us had messed with the attic door. We said no, and she mentioned that she'd heard footsteps upstairs and saw the doorknob moving, like someone was trying to open the door. I looked at Matt, hoping he'd be as freaked out as I was, but he just laughed, saying the house was full of surprises. However, I noticed his mom didn't find it funny. She looked more scared than ever, and that was the first time I thought maybe I wasn't the only one sensing something wrong there. On my next visit, as soon as I stepped in, I felt the air heavier than ever. Matt's mom had gone out, so it was just the two of us. I was trying to hide my discomfort while he made us something to eat, when we heard a loud crash from upstairs. Matt looked at me, genuinely unsettled for the first time. "Should we go check it out?" he asked with a nervous smile. I hesitated, but I felt that if we didn't go up together at that moment, I'd never have the courage to come back there. We slowly climbed the stairs, our hearts racing. When we reached the top, we realized the noise had come from the hallway near the attic. The attic door handle was turning on its own, like someone on the other side was trying to open it. Matt and I froze, unsure of what to do. Before either of us could think of moving, the door suddenly swung open, revealing a pitch-black space inside. I felt a chill cut through me, like I'd been hit by an icy wind, even though the air around us was still. Matt, visibly shaken, took a step back. I could barely breathe. unable to look away from that emptiness that seemed to stare back at us. For a second, I could have sworn I saw a shadow moving inside, but maybe it was just my mind playing tricks. In a burst of instinct, Matt slammed the door shut and turned the key in the lock, securing it firmly. We rushed downstairs and out of the house without saying a word. Only once we were outside did he finally break the silence, admitting he'd also felt something strange there, but never wanted to acknowledge it because he thought it was silly. That confirmed my suspicion that there was something in that house that even he who lived there couldn't ignore. In that moment, I decided I wouldn't go back. There was something in that attic I didn't want to see again. After that night, Matt started coming over to my house instead, and little by little, he began to avoid spending much time alone there too. His mom never brought it up again, but I heard she had a pastor bless the house, which didn't help much. Matt told me the noises in the attic continued, but he'd learned to ignore them. I, however, could never forget that chill or the feeling of being watched. To this day, I wonder what, or who, was in that attic, and why it seemed so desperate to get out. It was a late Thursday night in San Antonio. I had just wrapped up a meeting that ran longer than expected, and the parking garage was almost empty. The echoes of my footsteps bounced off the concrete walls as I made my way back to my car on the third level. I was tired, just wanting to get home and collapse on the couch. The air smelled like stale exhaust, the type of stagnant air you'd expect in an underground garage. As I walked, I had that sudden feeling, the kind that crawls up your neck and raises the hair on your arms. I glanced back, trying not to make it obvious. I saw a figure, a man, maybe about 30 feet behind me. He was walking, looking straight at me. I turned my head forward again, trying to act normal, but the unease sank in. My pace picked up a bit, and my steps got sharper, echoing louder. I listened closely. His footsteps matched mine, step for step. I looked back again, this time more obviously. He was still there, no mistake about it. He was tall, dark hoodie, hands shoved deep in his pockets. His face was partly obscured by a cap, but I could tell his eyes were on me. My heart pounded, each beat echoing louder than my footsteps. I didn't like this one bit. My car wasn't too far, maybe 10 or 12 spaces down. I just needed to get there, get in, and lock the doors. I walked faster, my breath quickening. My keys were in my pocket, but as I reached in, a cold realization hit me. I didn't feel them. I patted my jacket pocket, then my jeans pocket, both empty. Panic started to creep in. I reached my car, a beat-up old sedan with faded blue paint, and turned around again. The guy was closer now, maybe 20 feet away. He had definitely sped up. I felt my stomach twist, a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead. I kept one hand on the door handle as if that would somehow protect me, while my other hand frantically patted down every pocket. Nothing. My keys weren't there. My mind raced. Did I drop them somewhere? Leave them in the meeting room? No time to think. The guy was closing in. I forced myself to stay calm, at least on the outside. I couldn't let him know I was panicking. I took a deep breath, turned my back to the car, and tried to look casual. The guy was almost right behind me now, and I had to do something. I couldn't get in my car, couldn't drive away. Running crossed my mind, but the stairwell was at least 30 feet back in the opposite direction. My heart hammered in my chest, and I could feel the adrenaline hitting me hard. I knew I had to think fast. He was about 10 feet away when I finally spoke. "Hey man, can I help you with something?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It came out more shaky than I intended. I didn't want to sound scared, but I could hear the tension in my own voice. He didn't answer. He just kept coming, his eyes locked on me. That was when the fear really hit. This guy wasn't just some random person heading to his own car. He was here for me. My muscles tensed, and I could feel my fight or flight kicking in hard. The garage was empty, no one else around. Just me, this guy, and a lot of concrete. I decided to move. I backed away from my car, keeping my eyes on him, trying to keep the distance between us. He was maybe 5 feet away now, and I could see his hands still deep in his hoodie pockets. I didn't like that at all. I didn't know what he might be hiding in there. A knife, a gun, anything. My mouth went dry and I felt my palms sweating. "Look, man, I don't want any trouble," I said, taking another step back. My voice echoed slightly in the empty garage. He still didn't say anything. He just kept coming. His silence was scarier than if he'd said something threatening. At least then I'd know what he wanted. The quiet made my imagination run wild, and none of the scenarios were good. I turned, finally deciding to make a break for it. I bolted towards the stairwell. My feet pounded against the concrete and I heard his footsteps pick up speed behind me. He was chasing me now. The sound of his shoes hitting the ground seemed to grow louder with every step. My legs burned as I sprinted, the cold air filling my lungs. I reached the door to the stairwell and slammed into it, pushing it open with all my weight. The metal door banged against the wall, and I took the stairs 2 at a time. I could hear him behind me, the heavy thuds of his feet echoing in the stairwell. My breathing was ragged, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't dare look back. I just focused on moving, on getting away from him. I reached the next landing and pushed through another door, back out into the garage on the 2nd level. I paused for a split second, looking around. There had to be someone, anyone. But it was empty, just rows of cars and the dim, flickering lights overhead. I could still hear him coming, the door to the stairwell slamming open behind me. I had to keep moving. My eyes scanned the rows of cars, looking for a place to hide. I spotted an SUV a few rows over, its back hatch slightly open. I didn't think, I just ran for it. I dove behind the SUV, crouching down low, trying to make myself as small as possible. My chest heaved as I tried to catch my breath, every muscle in my body tense. I listened, straining to hear his footsteps. They were slower now, more deliberate. He was looking for me. I could hear him moving between the cars, his shoes scuffing against the concrete. I held my breath, my body pressed against the cold metal of the SUV. The footsteps got closer and I could see his shadow stretching across the ground. He was just on the other side of the SUV now. My heart pounded so hard I was sure he could hear it. I clenched my teeth, trying to stay completely still. He paused, and I could see his feet through the gap under the car. He was standing there just a few feet away. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying he wouldn't come around the side. After what felt like an eternity, I heard his footsteps move away. I opened my eyes, just a crack, watching as his shadow moved further and further from where I was hiding. I let out a slow, shaky breath, trying to keep quiet. My entire body was trembling, the adrenaline still surging through me. I stayed there, crouched behind the SUV until I couldn't hear his footsteps anymore. I didn't know if he had given up or if he was still searching somewhere else in the garage, but I knew I couldn't stay there forever. I needed to get help. My phone. I reached into my pocket, my hands still shaking. I pulled it out, my fingers fumbling as I tried to unlock it. I managed to dial 911, pressing the phone to my ear. It rang, each second feeling like an hour. Finally, a dispatcher answered, her voice calm and professional. 911, what's your emergency? I kept my voice low, barely above a whisper. I'm in the parking garage at Commerce and Navarro. There's a guy. He's following me. I think he's trying to hurt me. The dispatcher started asking questions, her voice steady, trying to keep me calm. I answered as best as I could, giving her my location, describing the guy. She told me to stay on the line, that officers were on their way. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me, my eyes darting around the garage, watching for any sign of movement. I stayed crouched there, every muscle in my body aching from the tension. The dispatcher kept talking to me, telling me to stay calm. That help was coming. I could hear sirens in the distance, faint but getting closer. I clung to that sound, focusing on it, letting it drown out the fear that was still gripping me. It felt like forever, but finally I saw the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the concrete walls of the garage. I stood up slowly, my legs shaky, and stepped out from behind the SUV. I waved my arm, trying to get their attention. A police car pulled up and two officers got out, their flashlights cutting through the dim light of the garage. One of them called out to me, "You okay, sir?" I nodded, my voice cracking as I spoke. Yeah, I think so. He's still in here somewhere." The officers nodded, one of them staying with me while the other moved further into the garage, his flashlight sweeping between the cars. I could hear them calling out, telling the guy to show himself, that they were armed. I just stood there, my body still trembling, watching as they searched. After a few minutes, the officer who had stayed with me spoke into his radio. I could hear more sirens approaching, more officers arriving. They were going to sweep the entire garage, make sure the guy was gone. The officer looked at me, his expression softening a bit. "You're lucky you got away," he said. "These places can be dangerous at night." I nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, I just want to go home." He nodded, motioning towards one of the patrol cars. "Let's get you out of here. We'll take your statement downtown, and then you can head home." I followed him to the car, my legs still feeling weak, my heart still racing. I climbed into the back seat, leaning my head against the cool window. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, leaving me feeling drained, every muscle in my body aching. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to calm myself. The ride to the station was a blur. The officer asked me questions and I answered, my voice sounding distant even to myself. I kept replaying everything in my head. The footsteps, the guy's face, the way he had just kept coming, no matter what I said. The fear was still there, just under the surface, making it hard to think about anything else. At the station, they had me fill out some paperwork, gave me a cup of water that I barely touched. They told me they would keep looking for the guy, that they'd increase patrols around the area. I nodded, not really hearing them. All I wanted was to get out of there, to go home and lock the door behind me. Finally, they let me go. One of the officers offered me a ride and I accepted. My car could wait. I wasn't ready to go back to that garage, not yet. The ride home was silent, the city lights passing by in a blur. When we pulled up in front of my apartment building, I thanked the officer and got out, my legs still feeling unsteady beneath me. I made my way up to my apartment, my hands shaking as I unlocked the door. I stepped inside, closing it behind me, leaning against it for a moment. The silence of the apartment was overwhelming, the fear still clinging to me. I locked the door, sliding the deadbolt into place, then checked it twice just to be sure. I sank down onto the couch, my head in my hands, taking deep, shaky breaths. I was safe. The guy was gone. The police were looking for him. But the fear didn't go away. It stayed there, just under the surface, a reminder of how close it had been. I closed my eyes, trying to push it away, trying to focus on the fact that I was home, that I was okay. But I knew it would be a long time before I felt safe again. It was my second week working night security at the Longview Plaza Mall. I took the job because I needed something steady, and the hours fit my schedule. It wasn't glamorous, mostly walking the empty corridors, making sure no one was breaking in, and dealing with the occasional alarm glitch. It was a paycheck and it kept me moving, which was better than sitting behind a desk all night. The mall at night is a different kind of quiet. It's not peaceful. It's the sort of silence that makes you more aware of everything around you. The soft hum of the air conditioning, the way the lights buzzed above me, even the sound of my own breathing seemed to echo off the polished tile floors. There's no background chatter, no sounds of shoes hitting the floor, no smell of food coming from the food court. Just the empty stores, dark displays, and the muted glow of the emergency lights that stayed on all night. It was around 2 a.m. when I first noticed it. I was doing my rounds, walking past the clothing stores, glancing into the windows, checking to make sure everything was as it should be. There were mannequins posed behind glass, dressed in clothes that would have looked out of place anywhere but a mall display. And then I saw it. A shadow move. I stopped, squinting into the store, trying to make sense of what I saw. I thought it might have been the reflection of something, maybe one of those ceiling lights flickering. But no, it was behind the mannequins. It was a quick flash, almost like someone ducking down. My heart rate picked up a bit, and I found myself holding my breath. I took a step closer to the glass, leaning in, trying to peer into the darkness. Nothing. I couldn't see anything. No movement, no sound. Just the still, lifeless mannequins staring back at me. I shook my head and let out a breath, telling myself I was just tired. I'd been working late shifts and wasn't used to the hours yet. I moved on, finishing my round and heading back to the security office. The office was a small, cramped room in the back corner of the mall, filled with monitors that showed the various security feeds. I sat down, sipped some cold coffee, and stared at the screens. The feeds were mostly still, showing the empty hallways and storefronts. I kept my eyes on the screen showing the store where I thought I saw the shadow. Nothing moved. The store was completely empty. I shook my head again and looked away, focusing on something else, trying not to think too much about it. Maybe an hour later, I was back out on my rounds. The mall still had that same unnerving quiet. I was walking by the electronics store when I heard it. A whisper. It was soft, almost like a breeze, but I knew there was no breeze inside the mall. I froze, my ears straining, trying to catch it again. Nothing. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the empty corridor. The stores were dark, the displays were still, and there wasn't anyone around. I swallowed hard, feeling my throat go dry. My hand went to the flashlight on my belt, and I flicked it on, the beam of light cutting through the darkness. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed back at me, louder than I expected. I waited, listening. Nothing. I shook my head, feeling a chill run down my back. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was letting the empty mall get to me. But something felt off. I could feel my heart pounding, my palms starting to sweat. I kept moving, shining the flashlight into the dark corners, looking for anything out of place. The rest of the round was uneventful, and I eventually made my way back to the office. I sat down and watched the cameras again, my eyes scanning the screens, looking for anything, any sign of movement, any shadows, anything that didn't belong. The hours dragged by, and I found myself jumping at every small noise. A vent rattling, the sound of a light clicking off, the creak of the building settling. I was on edge, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It was almost 4 a.m. when I saw it again. This time it was on the camera feed. A shadow moving between the displays in the department store. I leaned in, my eyes narrowing, trying to make sense of it. The shadow moved quickly, darting behind a shelf, disappearing from view. My heart jumped, and I grabbed my flashlight, pushing myself up from the chair. I didn't wait. I headed out of the office, my footsteps echoing in the empty corridor as I made my way to the store. I stopped outside the entrance, the flashlight beam sweeping across the dark displays. The mannequins stood there, frozen, their blank faces turned toward me. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, the sound of my footsteps muffled by the carpeted floor. I moved slowly, the flashlight cutting through the darkness, my eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, my breathing shallow. "Whoever's in here, you need to come out," I called out, my voice sounding more confident than I felt. There was no response. I kept moving, stepping deeper into the store. The light flickered over shelves of clothes, racks of shoes, displays of handbags. And then I heard it again. The whisper. It was closer this time, like it was right behind me. I spun around, the flashlight beam jerking across the store, but there was nothing there. Just empty space. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck standing up. I turned back around, continuing through the store, my eyes darting from side to side, my ears straining for any sound. The whisper came again, this time from the far corner of the store. I moved toward it, my steps slow and cautious, my flashlight held out in front of me. The corner was dark, the light barely reaching it. I stepped closer, my heart pounding, my breathing shallow. I could feel the tension in my shoulders, the way my muscles were coiled, ready to react. I reached the corner, the flashlight beam sweeping across the floor. There was nothing there. No one. Just a stack of boxes and a few mannequins, their blank faces turned toward me, their arms posed in unnatural positions. I let out a shaky breath, lowering the flashlight. I was just about to turn around when I saw it. Movement. Not a shadow this time. One of the mannequins. Its arm twitched. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, my eyes locked on the mannequin. For a moment I thought I was seeing things, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But then it moved again. The arm jerked and then the head turned, just slightly, its blank face tilting toward me. I stumbled back, my heart slamming in my chest, the flashlight beam shaking as I tried to keep it steady. The mannequin didn't move again. It just stood there, its face turned toward me, its expressionless features staring. I could feel the panic rising in my chest, the urge to turn and run. I took a step back, then another, my eyes never leaving the mannequin. And then I heard it, the whisper, right in my ear. I spun around, the flashlight swinging wildly, but there was no one there. The store was empty. My breathing was fast and shallow, my hands shaking. I backed out of the store, my eyes darting from side to side, every shadow seeming to move, every display looking like it was hiding something. I didn't stop until I was out in the corridor, the flashlight beam pointed at the entrance, my heart pounding in my ears. I stood there for a long moment, trying to catch my breath, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. The mannequin had moved. I knew it had. I wasn't imagining it, I wasn't losing my mind. But there was no one there. No one could have moved it. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, trying to think. I needed to get back to the office, to check the cameras, to see if they had caught anything. I turned and started walking, my steps quick, my eyes darting around, every shadow seeming to shift, every sound making me jump. I made it back to the office and slammed the door shut behind me, locking it. I sat down in front of the monitors, my hands still shaking as I switched the camera feed to the department store. The screen flickered and I watched, my eyes scanning the displays, looking for any sign of movement. The store was still. The mannequins were where they had been, their blank faces staring, their arms posed. I leaned in, my eyes narrowing, trying to see if any of them had moved. And then I saw it. One of the mannequins, the one in the corner. It was facing the wrong way. Its head was turned, its arm raised. My stomach dropped, and I felt a chill run down my spine. It had moved. I wasn't imagining it. I watched the feed, my eyes glued to the screen, waiting for something to happen. The mannequin didn't move again. The store was silent, empty. I shook my head, trying to make sense of it, trying to figure out what I was dealing with. I didn't believe in ghosts or spirits or anything like that, but there was no other explanation. Something was in that mall, something I couldn't see. The rest of the night was a blur. I stayed in the office, my eyes on the monitors, watching the stores, the corridors, every corner of the mall. I didn't go back out. I couldn't. I was too shaken, too scared of what I might find. The whispers continued, soft, barely audible, like they were just out of reach. I tried to ignore them, tried to focus on the screens, but it was impossible. The whispers were everywhere, echoing through the empty mall, coming from every direction. When the morning finally came and the lights flickered on, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The whispers stopped, the shadows seemed to fade, and the mannequins were just mannequins again. I got up, my body aching from the tension, my head pounding. I grabbed my things and left without looking back, the mall feeling less like a place of work and more like something I needed to escape from. I called in sick the next night, and the night after that. Eventually, I quit. I couldn't go back. I couldn't face whatever was in that mall, whatever was moving those mannequins, whispering in the dark. I still don't know what it was. I don't think I ever will, but I know what I saw. I know what I heard, and I know I'll never set foot in Longview Plaza Mall again. It was supposed to be a quick job, a simple afternoon unloading some old furniture into a storage unit on the outskirts of Spokane, Washington. The day had started off like any other, with clear skies and a chill in the air that made you wish you'd brought an extra layer. I'd rented the unit because my garage was running out of space. Too many old couches and boxes of who knows what, and my wife Karen had been on my case about decluttering. Fair enough, I thought. I drove up to the storage facility just after lunch. The place was quiet, tucked away behind a few rows of big warehouses. It had a single building that looked like an office, and then rows of storage units that stretched in every direction. Each unit had those steel roll-up doors with a padlock clasp. The whole area was surrounded by a chain-link fence with a keypad gate that made a rusty noise whenever it moved. Not exactly the Ritz, but it was cheap and it worked. The unit I rented was somewhere in the middle of a long row, number 214. I parked my truck in front, unlocked the roll-up door, and started moving boxes out of the truck bed. The door made a squeal when it opened, the kind of sound that could set your teeth on edge. I took a deep breath and told myself it was just a quick trip. Get in, unload, lock up, leave. Easy. I was about halfway through unloading, stacking some old dining chairs against the wall, when I heard a loud clang. The kind of clang that stops you dead in your tracks. Before I could even react, the door slammed shut behind me. I whipped around and lunged for the handle, but it was too late. The door clicked, locked from the outside. I pressed my palms against the cold steel, pushing, pulling, but it didn't budge. My heart gave a quick jump and I swallowed down a rising panic. I reached into my pocket for my phone, but then I remembered. I'd left it on the seat of the truck, charging. Stupid. Stupid. I cursed under my breath, then banged my fist against the door a few times. Hey, anyone out there? My voice echoed in the small space, and I listened, waiting for a response. Nothing. It was pitch black inside. No lights in here, just total darkness. I could barely see my hand in front of my face. I turned around, trying to orient myself when I heard it. A faint tapping. The sound was coming from somewhere deeper in the storage facility. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't like a random echo or a rat scuttling around. No, it was deliberate, slow, rhythmic tapping. Tap, tap, tap. I stayed still, ears straining to catch every noise. Maybe it was just someone working in another unit, I thought. But the sound didn't stop. It grew louder, more defined. Tap, tap, tap. Each one echoed against the steel walls, sending a cold shiver down my spine. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside, somewhere in the depths of the storage unit rows. I fumbled around, my hands brushing against boxes and dusty furniture until I found an old flashlight in one of the boxes I was moving. It was a bit banged up, but when I clicked it on, a weak yellow beam flickered to life. The light shook as my hand trembled. I scanned around, the narrow beam catching corners and the dull shine of metal shelves. The unit was mostly empty except for the stuff I'd brought. But that tapping, it was coming from somewhere beyond these walls, beyond the door, but close enough that I could feel it in my chest. I moved closer to the door, pressing my ear against the cold metal. My pulse thudded in my ears, almost drowning out the noise, but it was still there. I knocked on the door again, harder this time. Hello? Is someone out there? No answer, just the tapping. It seemed to move, like it was drifting from one side of the facility to the other. Slow and deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. I stepped back, trying to think. There had to be a way out. I ran my hands along the inside of the door, feeling for any kind of latch, but there was nothing. The storage unit was a sealed box. The air was getting stuffy, and I felt a bead of sweat run down my back. I needed to stay calm. Think, man. Think, I muttered to myself. Then the tapping stopped. The sudden silence was almost worse. I held my breath, waiting, straining to hear anything. Then from somewhere outside the door I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps. My heart started to race and I banged on the door again, harder this time. Hey, I'm in here, let me out. The footsteps stopped. I waited, my ear pressed against the door, but all I heard was silence. Then, without warning, the tapping started again. Closer this time. It was no longer faint, it was right outside, like someone was tapping on the door of the unit next to mine. Tap, tap, tap. I backed away from the door, my breath coming in short gasps. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I didn't want to be here anymore. I shone the flashlight around, looking for anything that could help. My eyes landed on a rusted crowbar leaning against the back wall. I rushed over, grabbing it, feeling the rough metal in my hands. It wasn't much, but it was something. I went back to the door and wedged the crowbar under the bottom edge. I pushed down, using all my weight. The metal groaned, but the door didn't budge. I grit my teeth, trying again, but it was no use. The door was locked tight. Suddenly I heard a noise behind me, a scraping sound like metal on concrete. I spun around, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly. The beam landed on one of the boxes, and I froze. The box had moved. Just a few inches, but it had definitely moved. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking. The only answer was the tapping, now echoing through the walls, surrounding me. I tightened my grip on the crowbar, my knuckles white. My eyes darted around the small space, every shadow seeming to shift and move. The air felt thicker, and each breath was harder to take. Then, from the darkness, I heard something else. A whisper. It was soft, almost too quiet to hear, but it was there. Words I couldn't make out, just a low murmur that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I backed up until I hit the wall, the cold steel pressing against my back. The whispering grew louder, mixing with the tapping, filling the space with an overwhelming noise that made my head pound. "Stop it!" I shouted, slamming the crowbar against the door. The clang echoed through the unit, drowning out the whispers for just a moment. My breathing was ragged, my chest tight. I needed to get out. Now. I turned back to the door, slamming the crowbar against it again and again. The metal rang out, each hit sending vibrations up my arms. The tapping outside grew louder, more insistent, like whoever, or whatever, was out there was getting impatient. Tap, tap, tap. Faster now, more forceful. I kept hitting the door, my arms aching, the flashlight flickering with each swing. Then, suddenly, the tapping stopped. The silence was deafening, pressing in on me from all sides. I lowered the crowbar, my breath coming in gasps. I listened, waiting, but there was nothing. No footsteps, no whispers, just silence. I took a step back, the flashlight beam sweeping across the unit. My eyes landed on the box that had moved earlier. It was open now, the flaps pushed back. I hadn't opened it. I knew I hadn't. I took a step closer, the beam shaking as my hand trembled. Inside the box was a small black recorder, one of those old tape recorders, the kind you'd see in a detective movie. The whispering started again, louder this time, and I realized it was coming from the recorder. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cold plastic. The whispering grew louder, more urgent, words I still couldn't understand. I grabbed the recorder and hit the stop button. The whispering cut off, leaving the unit in silence once again. I stared at the recorder, my heart pounding. Who had put it there, and why? I turned it over in my hands, looking for anything that could give me a clue, but it was just a plain, black recorder. No markings, no labels, nothing. Then, from outside the door, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A voice. Low and raspy, barely more than a whisper. "Let me in." I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The voice was right outside the door, so close I could almost feel the breath on my skin. I backed away, the flashlight flickering. The voice came again, louder this time. "Let me in." I turned and ran to the back of the unit, my hands shaking as I tried to think. There had to be a way out, some way to get away from whatever was out there. I scanned the walls, the ceiling, looking for anything. A vent, a crack, anything. But there was nothing. Just 4 solid steel walls and a door that wouldn't open. The voice came again, almost a growl now. "Let me in." I gripped the crowbar, my hands slick with sweat. I didn't know what was out there, but I knew I couldn't let it in. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I had to be smart about this, had to stay calm. Then, without warning, the door rattled, the metal clanging as something slammed against it from the outside. I jumped, the flashlight slipping from my hand and clattering to the floor. The light flickered, then went out, plunging the unit into darkness. I dropped to my knees, my hand scrambling across the concrete floor until I found the flashlight. I clicked it back on, the weak beam barely cutting through the darkness. The door rattled again, harder this time, the metal groaning under the force. Whatever was out there, it was trying to get in, and it was getting closer. I backed up, my eyes darting around the unit. My foot hit something and I turned, the flashlight beam landing on an old wooden wardrobe I'd moved in earlier. It was tall, the kind of thing you'd find in a grandparent's attic with heavy doors that creaked when they opened. I grabbed the handle, pulling the door open and climbing inside. It was cramped, the air thick with the smell of old wood and dust. I pulled the door closed, leaving just a crack to see through. The door to the unit rattled again, then stopped. Silence. I held my breath, my eyes fixed on the crack in the wardrobe door, watching the steel door of the unit. Then, slowly, the handle turned. My heart skipped a beat. The door creaked open, just an inch, then another. My hands tightened around the crowbar, my knuckles white. A figure stepped into the unit. Tall, hunched, its face hidden in shadow. It moved slowly, each step deliberate, the floor creaking under its weight. I watched, barely daring to breathe, as it moved closer, its head turning from side to side as if searching for something. The flashlight, still on the ground, cast long shadows across the walls, making the figure seem even taller, more twisted. It stopped, its head tilting to the side, listening. The silence was thick, pressing in on me, every creak of the wardrobe sounding like a thunderclap in the stillness. The figure took another step, then another, moving closer to the wardrobe. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my ears, each beat echoing through my skull. It reached out, its hand brushing against the side of the wardrobe, fingers trailing across the wood. I closed my eyes, praying it wouldn't open the door, wouldn't find me. The fingers stopped, resting against the handle. My breath caught in my throat. Then slowly the hand moved away, the figure turning and walking back toward the door. I opened my eyes, watching as it stepped out of the unit, the door closing behind it with a soft click. I stayed where I was, my body trembling, every muscle tense. I didn't move, didn't breathe, until I was sure it was gone. Then, slowly, I pushed the wardrobe door open, peering out into the dim light of the flashlight. The unit was empty. The door was closed, the only sound my own ragged breathing. I stepped out of the wardrobe, my legs shaky, my hands still gripping the crowbar. I moved to the door, pressing my ear against the cold metal, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no tapping, just silence. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I had to get out of here, had to find a way to open the door. I went back to the flashlight, picking it up and shining it around the unit. My eyes landed on the recorder still sitting in the box. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. Whatever was happening here, it had something to do with this. I hit the play button, the whispering starting up again, louder this time. I held the recorder up to my ear, trying to make out the words. They were still faint, still just out of reach. But there was something else. A noise in the background, almost like a voice. I turned the volume up, straining to hear. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, and then I heard it. A voice, low and raspy, repeating the same words over and over. "Let me in." I dropped the recorder, the plastic clattering against the concrete floor. The whispering cut off, leaving the unit in silence once again. I backed away, my heart pounding, my eyes fixed on the recorder. I didn't know what was happening, didn't know who or what was out there, but I knew I had to get out. Now. I turned back to the door, the crowbar in my hands. I wedged it under the bottom edge again, pushing down with all my weight. The metal groaned, the door creaking, but it didn't open. I grit my teeth, pushing harder, my muscles straining. The door shifted just an inch, then another. I pushed again, The door finally giving way, the lock snapping with a loud clang. I stumbled out into the open air, the cold breeze hitting me like a shock. I took a deep breath, the fresh air filling my lungs, and turned back to the unit. The door hung open, the darkness inside seeming to watch me, waiting. I didn't wait to see if anything else would happen. I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the concrete as I made my way back to the truck. I jumped in, slamming the door shut and locking it. I took a deep breath, my hands shaking as I started the engine. I didn't look back as I pulled out of the storage facility, the tires squealing against the pavement. I just kept driving, putting as much distance between me and that place as I could. I don't know what I saw in that unit, don't know who or what was out there. But I do know one thing, I'm never going back.